The chair calls to order this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified Number 48 Governing Board on September 14th, 2021. The time is 6 p.m. Vice President Sanowski, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Yes. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The chair will have a roll call starting from the chair's left.
Zach Lindsay.
Libby Hartwells.
Patty Beckman.
Julie Sanowski.
Jan Michael Greenberg. All 5 board members are present and there is a quorum. The board will now move to agenda item 2D, approval of the agenda. Are there any amendments to the agenda as presented? I do note that there is a request to move item 6D off the consent agenda for further discussion. Are there any other changes? The chair moves to approve the agenda as amended, the amendment being that agenda item 6D will be moved for further discussion. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Beckman seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve the agenda as amended. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to agenda item 3, student and staff recognitions and celebrations. Dr. Menzel.
Good evening, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, and members of the governing board. With all that we and other school districts around the nation and world have been dealing with over the past 18 months, sometimes we forget about the structure that exists outside the classroom, but still inside our school buildings that supports our 22,000 students. This evening, Dr. Melissa Sackos, Assistant Superintendent for Secondary Education, is here to tell you about 2 such backbones, one from Mountainside Middle School and the other from Chaparral High School. Dr. Sackos?
Thank you, Dr. Menzel, and good evening, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, governing board members, and Ms. Wagner. Being a school security officer is no easy task. Even on paper, the job description is somewhat daunting. It includes such activities as providing a highly visible security presence on school campus, monitoring activities before, during, and after school hours, as well as during extracurricular activities, monitoring student behavior on campus, being trained and maintaining certifications in first aid and CPR, and responding to emergency situations. Mountainside Principal Adam Luke joins us this evening to tell us about a recent incident at his school and the actions of Security Officer Vincent Salas. Mr. Luke, Mr. Salas, please join me.
Good evening. So if I remember correctly, I have to go like this to get in frame. So I'll just back up a little bit. So my name is Adam Luke, proud principal of Mountainside Middle School. And I'm going to try not to tear up during this because this is something that is extremely important and dear to all of us at Mountainside. So I would like to first introduce my friend and colleague, Vincent Salas. We have the privilege of calling him our security officer at Mountainside. When this event happened during lunch, the student was more than embarrassed and did not want to be named. Out of respect, but still needing to inform our staff, I sent out the email that I have in my hands. I tried to recreate something, but realized that what I put down in this email meant the most. So I'd like to read it. Cougars, most of you do not know that today at lunch, Vinny Salas saves a student's life on the patio. I am not publicly acknowledging him on Good Morning Mountainside, due to largely in part that the student is extremely embarrassed and does not want any more unwanted attention drawn to him today or tomorrow for that matter. So I will share with you all today and fill you in on today's events and highlight how lucky we are to have Vinny on our team. The student started to choke on the patio, made the choking sign to his throat, and Vinny immediately rushed over into action and performed the Heimlich maneuver and successfully unlodged the food that was causing upper respiratory obstruction. After the student's regurgitation, he was able to catch his breath. He was promptly sent to the nurse to be checked out and cleaned up. His parents picked him up shortly. He is at home doing well. I want to thank Vincent Salas for his heroic feat he performed today. He saved a child's life and did what he needed to do without giving a second thought or an ounce of panic. It was over before most of us knew what was happening. When asked about it, he simply stated, "Just part of my job, you know." First to greet you in the morning and one of the last to say goodnight. Humble, dedicated to children are just a few, and caring are just a few words to describe Vinny. We are lucky to have him on our campus, and today, a student is alive because of him. Thank you, Vinny.
Thank you, Mr. V, for being in the right place at the right time. Would you like to say anything?
I'd just like to say thank you. I was just in the right place at the right time. I was just doing my job. I appreciate the recognition from Mr. Luke and the district, and I am honored to be an SUSD team member. Thank you.
So joining Mr. Salas tonight are his wife, Jessica, and his daughter, Ruthie. You want to wave? Ruthie is a kindergartner at Anasazi Elementary School. Mr. Salas has been with SUSD for 3 years and comes to us with 18 years of security experience. That experience was the key to the positive outcome that took place at Mountainside on August 31st. Thank you, sir. And please accept this recognition coin on behalf of the governing board. Our second celebration is equally heartwarming. I'd like to invite Mrs. Leslie Rold and Chaparral High School principal, if he's made it from Coronado to the Mojave yet, to join us at the podium. Oh, you made it. All right. Since joining Chaparral High School as a guidance counselor in 2013, Mrs. Rold has advised hundreds of Firebirds and encouraged them to dream big about their future and helping them create goals to lead them to success in college and beyond. Even for those students that are not on our caseload, Mrs. Rold is there for them, and I happen to know 2 of them very personally. We learned recently that one of her former advisees nominated her for an award for her new, from her new education home, Yale University, in New Haven, Connecticut. Gabrielle Roman, as many of you will recall, graduated from Chaparral High School in May of this past year, is a freshman at Yale now, and nominated Mrs. Rold to be recognized for the 2021 Yale Educator Award. Sponsored by the Yale Office of Undergraduate Admissions, the award recognizes educators from around the world who inspire and support their students to perform at high levels and to achieve excellence. Students entering Yale's class of 2025 were asked to nominate outstanding educators who have deeply impacted their lives. Clearly, Gabrielle believes this of Mrs. Rold. Isn't that right, Gabrielle?
Yes, it is. Hi. Can you hear me okay? Yes.
Good to see you, Gabrielle. Good to see you, Gabrielle. Tell us a little bit about your former guidance counselor, Ms. Rold.
Of course. So, hey everyone, my name is Gabrielle Roman. I graduated from Chaparral earlier this year, and I'm now at Yale University intending to major in biomedical engineering. I feel blessed to have had Ms. Rold as such a large part of my life to this day. I had friends who treated Rold as their counselor, even though they were assigned someone else because they trusted her. She welcomes us despite her incredibly packed schedule. Despite having 500 plus students under her belt, she took the time to get to know me personally. This personal connection developed trust, which transformed her encouragement into power. I know you're all busy, so I'll tell a brief story. But sophomore year, I walked into her office one day with a friend and an idea to fundraise money for a low-income school. She told me I had to create a club. Fast forward a month or so, and our new club, Be the Change, had over 60 members at their first meeting, and continue to be arguably the most active club on Chaparral's campus, if anyone can ask. But during the pandemic, I'd ask Rold how I could help students during that time, and then I would plan for Be the Change accordingly, such as the tutoring we provided in spring of 2020, alongside countless consistent service opportunities and a drive for the Navajo Nation that provided over 3,000 COVID necessity supplies to nearly 200 families on the reservation. Now I'm comforted by the fact that our new Be the Change officers have Miss Rold to ask for help whenever they need, just as I did. Miss Rold was always by my side, anxious to help me. She helped give me confidence to apply to 22 schools, in which I'm happy to say I gained acceptance into 18 after many, many sessions of reading essays with Miss Rold. She's the best word cutter out there, and that's just undebatable. She saw potential in me and nominated me for some of the most life-changing experiences I've had, such as Girls State and the Scottsdale Charles Foundation Most Outstanding Student Award. And I'm so happy that Yale finally allowed me to nominate her for something and give back to her. She was one of 21 counselors in the world selected for my Yale incoming class of 1,800 students. Her excitement and kindness inspire me every day, and I so badly wish that she came to Yale with me so I could continue to stop by her office and say hi to her every week. She's not only my counselor, but a friend and family. And my excitement levels rise exponentially whenever I see her. Chaparral wouldn't be the same without her, and I would not be where I am today without her as a beacon of positivity in my life. So, thank you, Miss Rold. I miss you, I love you, and congratulations.
Okay, my glasses are fogging. Gabrielle, we're so appreciative that you were able to join us tonight. Your mom was worried it was going to be late on your time zone, 9 o'clock, and we had to remind her that you're in college and you're going to be up this late. So it's so great.
Yeah, I don't sleep.
It's so great to see you, and good luck at your studies at Yale. And hang on tight, because we'll allow Ms. Rold to say anything she would like to say.
Oh my goodness, I am speechless, which doesn't happen. He knows this. Gabrielle, oh my goodness, like I don't even know what to say. You mean so much to me. Like I feel like you changed me. And just to all of you being here, you have no idea how much this means to me. Like this job every day, it's not even a job. Like it's something that I get to do. Like pinch me and meet students like her and many others that have changed my life. I'm speechless because she's the exceptional one, not me. Like the fact that she's here, I'm speechless. So thank you so much. I grew up in this district. This district means the world to me. I went to Saguaro. My husband went to Arcadia. My kids go to Desert Mountain or will go to Desert Mountain. And just I have a long history with SUSD, and the fact I get to work here in this district and give back to students, like I gain so much more than I give, and especially meeting students like Gabrielle, like who have changed my life. And so thank you for having me here. Thank you to Todd for always supporting me. He always supports me with the rest of the administration and the other counselors and the teachers. And especially to my students and especially to Gabrielle, I love you so much, and I'm always going to be here for you. And whenever you doubt yourself, you call me, okay? Thank you.
Mrs. Rold, we know you are very touched as much as we are. And Gabrielle, your thoughtfulness in nominating Mrs. Rold for this award, which, by the way, is one of 21 handed out to guidance counselors this year by Yale, is very much appreciated and obviously very meaningful to Mrs. Rold. So Mrs. Rold, here it is. Please accept this challenge coin on the behalf of the school district. Of course you can. You're awesome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, Gabrielle.
That's leaving me almost speechless. Thank you for sharing those celebrations with us this afternoon. Thank you, Vinny. Thank you, Leslie, for your service to our students. It's a good reminder of why we do what we do. Every person on our team has a valuable role to play, and I am extremely proud of the work that you're doing on behalf of our students every day, so thank you for being here. One more thing to celebrate this evening before we move on, and that is to report on the highly successful Middle School Fall Sports Festival that was held this past Saturday at 8 baseball fields around the community and on 12 high school volleyball courts. More than 500 6th, 7th, and 8th grade girls, representing all 4 of our K-8 schools and all 5 of our middle schools, served, set up, and spiked their way in volleyball matches. And nearly 275 middle grade boys took to high school and local baseball diamonds to display the skills they've been working on since the second week of the school year. Middle school athletics are a good first exposure for students who may be thinking of trying out for a high school team at some point. But more importantly for now, it's an opportunity to make new friends, learn the fundamentals and rules of a sport, and just have fun. Tier 2 teams are forming now for competition. The fall middle school season is just around the corner. And just a reminder, last year we weren't able to have this. So each step along the journey, we've been able to reinstate things that are really important for our students. And I think that's worth celebrating. I did forget there is one other thing, just a teaser, because we can't really give too much information here. But tomorrow, the names of the semifinalists in the 2022 National Merit Scholarship Program will be released. We are sworn to secrecy until then, but I can share with you this evening that SUSD will have 20 high school seniors in the running for 7,500 National Merit Scholarships worth nearly $30 million this school year. We look forward to celebrating this achievement with them and with you at a future board meeting.
On behalf of the board, I just want to thank Vinny and Leslie again for all of their hard work, not just saving lives physically, but saving lives emotionally and supporting our students in every way they can. Without our security guards and without our counselors and the rest of our staff, we could not do the job that we do every day, serving all of our students and providing a high-quality, future-focused education to them all. So thank you very much again. We appreciate you being here, and we look forward to all the amazing things you continue to do moving forward. And a big congratulations to our 20 students in the running for the National Merit Scholarship as well. That's a very impressive feat, and I think demonstrates the academic prowess that this district really has. So thank you. The board will now move to agenda item 4, superintendent's comments. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg. I will only add one thing to the celebrations we've had this evening, because that is not anything that I want to diminish at all. But we also have tracked on a weekly basis our student enrollment counts. And I think it's worth noting that compared to a year ago at a comparable timeline, pre-K through 12, Scottsdale Unified School District is down 4 students from where we were a year ago. If you look at just our K-12 enrollment, we're down 132. And the churning in the enrollment seems to have been leveled off, which often happens as you see the numbers get corrected. And so overall, we're at 22,064 students pre-K through 12th grade, and we're looking forward to continuing to pursue additional enrollment in our 28 physical buildings and Scottsdale Online as we work to regain students that may have made other choices previously and become part of what we know is an exceptional school district.
Thank you. The board will now move to agenda item 5, information discussion items, 5A, Native American Education Program Update and PYT IGA Renewal. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg and members of the governing board. This evening, I would like to invite Sheila Seapress to the podium. You may remember a year ago when we considered the IGA with the Salt River Pima Maricopa Indian community. Sheila presented to the governing board, and people were so interested in the conversation, they said maybe we could have this a couple times a year. So this evening, Sheila will update us as well as provide some information on the IGA with the Pasquayaki tribe. Sheila.
Thank you, and good evening, esteemed board members and Dr. Menzel and Gladys Wagner. I kind of joked around with everybody. I said, the last time I was here, I was only supposed to be in the background looking pretty. I said, now they want me up front, so I must be really adorable. So, But with this program, like I told you in the past spring here, that this program has been within our district for a very long time. It was just more or less not really acknowledgeable because it's something that, as natives, you don't boast yourself. It's against our culture to do that. But me, on the other hand, I ring my bell, I ring the kids' bells. I like to see them being acknowledged. The one thing I wanted to let you know is that we still do continue getting our 2 federal grants. We get a Title VI Federal Indian Education Formula Grant every year, which also has a parent committee on it, and we have a group of parents who have been very vocal and very supportive of our program. Primarily, ironically, the majority of them are Pasquayaki parents, that they themselves were high school students at Coronado at one time, so they've managed to be on this board. We don't have a real big formal election like most normal board members that most other committees do have. With natives, it's just a little different. Other districts do have a formalized one. Our parents really, they trust each other. They're there, they talk to each other. They're there to support us when we need it. If they don't feel that we're doing enough, they let me know. And so we kind of go back and forth in this. So with that, they always sign off. They take our recommendations, basically what I look at with everything, with the grades, what we're spending on, what kind of programs we have. If there's programs that we can collaborate with, we do, if that what we're able to do. They take the recommendations. And so far, I have never had them dispute anything with the recommendations that I have brought forth to them, because with this Title VI grant, as a district, we cannot submit this grant to federal without their approval. So they're the first line of defense, approving what I recommend that we should do with it, and not frivolously spend the money on things that aren't going to help the kids succeed or move on, or at least give them an opportunity to get outside of the little bubble that most of them do have. Yes, did you have a question? So, but anyway, so that's what we have for that committee, and most of those parents also sit on. We have a Johnson O'Malley grant that we also get that's funneled through the state. They sit on that as well, but that one with those parents, they and the student has to have their own tribal ID numbers. So only eligible parents can critique and vote on what we put with our Johnson O'Malley. So there's like 2 different types of grants, 2 different types of programs that we use with their money. And the one thing that I wanted to let you know is like from our last year of our Title VI, which is our largest budget, last year we got $119,577 for our program. This year, we were awarded $123,059. And they have informed us that later on, probably in another month or so, when they look at what the monies are that's coming back, we might get a few $100s more or a few $1,000s more. So we're just kind of keeping our fingers crossed at this point. Johnson O'Malley runs into 2 fiscal years, so we're still basically under 2020, 2021. That one is a very small grant. Normally, every year, we would get maybe $6,000, $7,000. It's not a very big grant, so the majority always gets cost out of Title VI. This year, we have $21,302.54. That one pays specifically only for like sports fees, summer school, for eligible Johnson O'Malley, which, like I said, the students have to have a tribal ID number. So those kids get from use of that money. We pay for summer school registrations out of both grants. Last year, for the June of 2021, we provided 26 students, basically gave them a free waiver for them to attend summer school. And it wasn't just for credit recovery. The majority of it, I would say maybe 5 kids worked for credit recovery. The other 21 was to get credits to get ahead. So that was a big positive push for us. So the schools that provided that, we got them. We had 10 from Arcadia, 15 from Coronado, and 1 from Desert Mountain High School. Out of Johnson O'Malley, for July 2021, we provided 23 students, because some of them decided, I need a break, I'm not coming back. So we allowed them to take a break. So from there, we had 8 from Arcadia, 14 from Coronado, and 1 from Desert Mountain. And then Title VI, that couldn't pay for the Johnson O'Malley students because they didn't have their own tribal ID. Good thing we got the money in time. We actually gave 6 of those students another additional, so there was 1 from Arcadia and 5 from Coronado. So we have, pretty much standard every year. I usually have 50 students attending summer school. But because of COVID, a lot of them were so tired of online and going to class, they wanted a break, so I gave them a break this time. I told them, but I expect them back this next summer. Sports fees, we cover sports fees for the Native students that can't pay those $150 fees. Some of them can't even pay the $25 free and reduced. So what we do is under Johnson O'Malley, so long as Johnson O'Malley will continue letting us do this, we will pay for their sports fees. This year, we actually had 19 kids request fee waivers for sports. And so far, we've paid for 11 of them. I have 8 pending invoices from various high schools. They're waiting to make sure that they make the team before they send us the invoice. So that's a big number. Normally, we used to only get maybe 2 or 3 that ask. But now we're getting more and more that's feeling comfortable and coming out and asking. So that's a good thing. Supplies for students, that's another thing that we use out of both grants. So if any student out there that can't afford to get a binder or paper or a pencil, all they gotta do is call me up and say, hey, I need this. We've got supplies at Coronado. We have a room there that we keep in a cabinet. So they just let me know. I have a few in my office, and we just get it to the parents. I had a few parents that called me this summer and said that they were embarrassed to ask because they have never had to use this before, but I told them, I said, don't feel embarrassed. All of us at some point have had to ask for help, and that's a good thing. It's better to ask for help than not get it at all. So I told them not to look at it like it's a bad thing. Look at it that you're doing it for your child. So they felt a little bit better after that. So we were able to provide this year, so far for last year of Title VI, we paid for basically 2 schools that needed some supplies for students. That was Sequoia and Arcadia. And then we provided copy paper with some excess monies that we have left. I always spread the love by giving schools copy paper because, you know, we always need copy paper in the offices. So that's what we use our extra money for. And then AP and PSAT test fees, we cover that as well for out of our Title VI funds. So this past year, we actually paid for 4 students out of Title VI to do their AP tests. And then we had 3 students for doing their PSAT because they were already juniors, so they had to pay a fee. So that was kind of up from last year. The year before that, I think we only had 2 of each. So they're slowly getting there. Dual enrollment fees is another big thing that was asked to me from the parents because it is expensive if they're doing a dual enrollment classes. It's $300 to $400 for a class. I requested that in our Title VI grant, and surprisingly, Washington approved it. So my argument for that was if we don't get these kids to look into college, they're not going to go to college. And on top of it, how can they apply for other scholarships if they're in sports or if they're in academics? You know, this is going to help them. So we were able to pay for 4 students for dual enrollment for that. One student, actually, she went both semesters, so she took advantage of about $800 for herself, so that was pretty well. We also pay for conference fees for any SUSD staff person that wants to go to a conference, if it's to learn about Native peoples, learn how to work with Native peoples. All they gotta do is just call me up. We have money set aside for that. Last year, we were only able to send 1 person, which was me, because, you know, we couldn't really send everybody last year because of the COVID thing. So I was able to attend one virtually. It was basically just to kind of come up with some ideas of what else we could spend our funds for. This year, we are fortunate enough, we have a Native Fathers is Sacredhood National Conference that's here in Phoenix. I'm actually able to send 10 people this year. And most of them are all school community specialists, and it's because of the fact that they do work with our families one-on-one. And some of the ideas that they get from that, they use it for their other families as well. So, and I do know that one of the community specialists went through the facilitators program to get that, just to kind of better herself on the whole process. So we're pretty excited about that. My biggest thing I get to go is to the ACES conference next week, is the American Indian Science and Engineering Society, which I'm also a member of. One of our Acadia students is presenting at this conference. So that was the main reason why I wanted to go. I'm very proud of her. She's just, I don't know, she's just amazing to me. And Mom just kind of slipped it into me through an email and said, by the way, she's going to be presenting. So I've been waiting for the agenda, finally got the agenda out, found out, and I said, I am going to go. And I promised Dr. Dodds Karen I would take pictures. I said, I'll be like the photographer, like going to this social media here. So that's pretty exciting. So I will be bringing that back, and hopefully we can have her come. I think we talked about April doing a kind of like a showcase of our Native kids that are going to be doing stuff for this year. So we'll be able to have her there. But that's pretty much all we're doing right now. We have some tutoring, going on with the staff that's working at Arcadia and Coronado and looking into other schools as well. We're hoping to start one here at Mojave. Principal, he's looking into that to see what days we're going to work with the family. So we're kind of slowly getting that started. It's a slow process. Normally by this year, I'd already have all the programs going, but due with everything else, it's just kind of a little crazy. And the one thing I wanted to, I know you're going to know more about it later, is our Pasquayaki Iga Renewal. We've had this grant, IGA. Hard to imagine that it's already been 5-6 years that it's time for renewal. But we have had a great working relationship with this tribe. The main office is in Tucson. It is farther away, but they have a liaison that's over here in Guadalupe, and we talk every chance we get. We email, talk about the kids, talk about what we can do for them. And so I'm really proud that we're getting to do the renewal for that as well. So that's all I have on my end so far. So.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions or comments? Board Member Hartwells?
I'd just like to thank you for clarifying about the parent committee. That was helpful.
Oh,
I appreciate all of your hard work, and it was really heartwarming to hear the impact on the students.
Board Member Beckman?
I really would love to have the board get an update on how that goes with this weekend with our Arcadia student. That's exciting.
yeah, I will put what I can do is do a little blurb after the whole thing's with some pictures or something, and I can send it on to Dr. Menzel, and he can get you guys a handout or something, yeah. I know, I'm very excited for her. I'm just so proud of her. I'm like a mom.
Are there any other questions or comments? Well, Sheila, I would just like to say, you began this by making a comment about being in the background, and I think this is the second meeting we've had now this year where you've had an important update and information for us to review. And I think that is something that I look forward to continuing, and I think this board looks forward to continuing really year on year, because we do want to highlight our students and the work that we do to support them, the very important work that you do, and that our parents, and I'm very thankful to the parents who serve on those boards, because I know it is time consuming. It's not the easiest thing to do, especially when they have other obligations. So I appreciate their time as well as your time in reviewing these Title VI grants and the Johnson O'Malley grants and approving the direction we're taking there. And I think in general, I mean, big congratulations to our students for attending summer school, to get ahead, to obtain credits that they've missed. Last year was a very difficult year. We've seen that across Maricopa County, especially with our Native American and immigrant families and first-generation families. So I think it's just crucial work. It really is, and I appreciate the support that you give them. Are there any other questions or comments on this? Thank you very much, and we look forward to receiving an update.
Okay.
Thank you. The board will now move to agenda item 5B, information discussion items, ESSER program update. Dr. Menzel.
Thank you, President Greenberg and members of the governing board. Tonight we have Shannon Crozier and Alice Spingola to talk about the ESSER program. We know we have 3 iterations, and they're going to kind of outline where we are in the process and then answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. Good evening, Board President Greenberg, Vice President Snowski, members of the board, and Dr. Menzel. Tonight we're just doing an overview of the ESSER program, how we've spent funds so far, and the anticipation of what we'll be doing in the future with additional ESSER funds. Originally, ESSER 1 was approved in March of 2020, and the money was pretty flexible. It was essentially funds to schools to help deal with COVID, to get support to schools that they needed for continuation of pay, to provide PPE to schools, anything that they might need to continue to have school open, technology, whatnot, so that kids could continue to learn. That first allocation was just over $2 million. We spent the bulk of that on continuation of pay, as well as providing a safe place to learn by either our own staff doing a safe place to learn, or with having outside vendors come in and provide a safe place to learn while our students were learning from home. We have spent most of that money, and we'll get into the breakdown of that here shortly. Those funds end September 22, so they end roughly a year from now. But we have spent most of those funds, and we'll just have a little bit left over to finish out the rest of this year with. Then in December 27th of 2020, COVID was obviously still here and not going anywhere. And so the federal government passed additional funds to schools to help with additional supports. They really kept with the same type of options for the program, didn't really change a whole lot of the rules for it, still very flexible in how we spent the money. However, the allocation was much larger this time. For this round, Scottsdale received $8.4 million for ESSER II funds. And we've gone through, we've allocated all of those funds out. A lot of that, a chunk of that went to the retention stipend that we did to employees. We paid part of that in March when employees did their contract renewal. And we will do the second half of that later in October, which will use a big chunk of those funds. We helped community schools out. Community schools had a large loss of revenue due to the fact that we couldn't have a lot of the programs, enrichment programs that we were needing. So to be able to help them to stay a solvent program, we put a lot of funds into keeping them and continuing to keep staff on hand so that we didn't have to try to lose staff and then try to rehire again, which is really difficult. We took care of summer school. Summer school was essentially free for all of our students, as well as a lot of the summer programs. So we put a lot of funds into those programs this summer. We put a lot towards varsity tutoring and quarantine tutors for when students are on quarantine and they need additional help. We've put a lot of funds into that, as well as money into MERV 13 filters. We're replacing those 5 times a year. That's a significant cost, but it helps to filter our classroom, provide better air for our kids in the classroom, as well as water bottles to students and water bottle filling stations at all of our schools. So we have multiple stations at our schools that have those filler stations since the drinking fountains have been turned off. And then we get to ESSER III. ESSER III was approved March of 21, considerably more money than the other two had, but it also had stipulations with it. The big stipulation being that 20% had to be set aside to address the learning loss, especially at schools that have higher needs and vulnerable populations. So we've put a big chunk of money towards that. For all of our campuses, we have more than 20% set aside for that. It required plans that had to be submitted to the board, that had to have community input, parent input onto it. It required a safe place to learn for student and instruction. And then it also said that the states had to require their maintenance of equity requirements. So we had a few more things that we had to address with that. However, with that fund, we picked up an additional just over $19 million. This kind of just looks at how we tried to break that out, but I'll show more so where we have those funds. We've been using them to pay for additional staff in Scottsdale online learning, especially as we know more parents are wanting to get into that program. We talked earlier in the summer, and the governing board approved using iReady as a learning loss tool to help with students with assessing and then also helping them with their reading. So we've set aside a chunk of money for that. We've set aside money for summer school program. We know that for the future, we're going to have more programs that are needed, not only for high school summer school, but just summer programming to help address learning loss in the future as well. So we've got $2 million set aside for that. And we based that off of this year. We did a significant amount this year with summer programming. So we based that off of what we spent this summer for that. We've got money set aside for technology, knowing that there'll be needs for that. Our big one is addressing the learning loss and kind of the internal grant program that we've set up within the district, where schools can come up with their own ideas on how to spend those funds, which Ms. Bengola will be talking about here shortly. I did set aside, and I know $4 million is a lot for ADM loss. I don't think we're going to need that. I don't feel like we're going to need that for this year. I don't know that we'll need it in the future, but we have the cushion. And there's other things that are going to come up. This grant goes until September of 24. There will be things that will come up between now and September of 24 that we couldn't have dreamed of or thought of. And so we've got some money set aside for those things that could possibly happen that we just don't even realize we need to think about right now. Additionally, community education support, again, they're doing better this year, so I don't know that we'll need it, but we do have a cushion for them if we need. PPE, most of that is going towards hand sanitizer, continuing to provide hand sanitizer into the classroom, but it is a requirement right now for masks. It is a requirement for transportation for masks, so we're also spending quite a bit on those. And then facilities. We know that we need the MERV 13 filters, that those are quite expensive. There might be other facility needs that come up that we need to do to address the schools. And then the last part of it is we had some positions. The bulk of them are covered under ESSER 2 for this year and for next year, but for that final year, we have the grant coordinator position, a fiscal support position, which is entering requisitions and EPARs and tracking all of those dollars for us to make sure that have things in correctly, as well as the data warehouse, a .4 psychologist, and our COVID specialist. So with that, you can see we do have the bulk of that going directly to the classroom through learning loss, through technology, through those supports direct to the classroom. So a good part of that is the financial recovery is larger because we put aside a big chunk, almost as like a contingency, and some, in case something comes up that we're not aware of that could happen between now and 2024. This just looks at where our balances are right now. Like I said, ESSER 1, it ends within the next year. We have just a small portion left, a little over $200,000 left with it. We'll use that up this year as projects come up. ESSER 2, right now we have a balance of $3.9 million, but there's things that are in there. We've already accounted for all of those dollars. We've actually accounted for most of the ESSER 3, but for the ESSER 2, we know that we still have roughly $1.5 million to pay out for retention stipends, which will take a large portion of that. We know that we want to have those positions for next year. We anticipate having those positions next year. That's another large chunk of money. So whereas the balance shows $3.9 million, it's because we have, some things are for the future that we haven't actually encumbered yet. But we do have all those dollars allocated out. And then ESSER 3, we're just starting to use those funds. Again, we have a plan for them, how we think we'd like to spend them. We're still working with the committees on how that looks. But we will start to then, as the year progresses, we'll start to use those funds more so for our projects that come up. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Bekola.
Good evening, President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, and board members, Dr. Menzel. The learning loss priorities is something that were identified based upon some work that Dr. Bachna did when looking at our data. So as a result of this, we decided to have some priorities. You can see that we want to increase reading proficiency of our elementary students, and we will use the FastBridge data to identify if we're successful in that. We also would like to increase the percentage of 8th grade students achieving proficiency in math, specifically pre-algebra. We saw a definite dip in proficiency levels, so this is something that we are going to look at putting resources towards. Also increasing the proficiency levels of our English language learners and our Title I students in math and reading, and then continuing our focus on student wellness and social emotional support. One thing that we looked at was with President Greenberg's input, we looked at some of the learning loss goals that we could aim for. So as we're looking at our proposals, we can determine what should be funded and what perhaps doesn't align with those learning loss priorities. So here you'll see the goals for the 21-22 school year in regards to math and ELA. We also, you'll note that we talked about 10 or more school days, trying to decrease the percentage of students that missed more than 10 days of school, as well as students achieving proficiency at the rating or the readiness for ACT. We are going to start a new committee for our proposals. Last year, a committee was formed And in terms of the need to meet, those committee members were by and large employees and staff members of school district. So this year, we reached out through our survey and asked interested parties to please respond to a survey and let us know if they were interested in joining a committee. So we have developed a proposal rubric, which is a little different from our previous rubric because we've now included those learning loss priorities. We want to make sure that proposals are aligned with that, with those priorities and with those goals. So as we meet with our committee, we'll be filling out a rubric and scoring the proposals based upon the information that's been submitted to us. Once the committee looks at this, we decide whether we're going to recommend the proposal to go to cabinet. Cabinet will give final approval for any of the proposals. So in this past 6 months, the committees have been quite busy. They started in April looking at proposals, and some were time sensitive, so it was important that we start in April looking at these proposals, preparing for the summer. You'll see that both Tavan and Laguna had summer programs that ESSER helped fund. Mr. Williamson, for our social studies coach, used data-based questioning, which is the DBQ project, as a means of teaching social studies. That proposal has been funded. We've also been able to hire some math specialists, and some are just recent postings. It says math specialists in 6 buildings. I want to make sure that you understand Hohokam and Yavapai are 2 of the buildings, so while they're in 1 building, they're still considered 2, so that's why it says 6 buildings. So it was 0.5 in Hohokam, 0.5 in Sequoia, 0.5 at Coronado High School, 0.5 in Pima, and a full-time at Tonalea. In addition, some reading specialists have been hired to help with the achievement gap. We've also been able to fund some gifted materials since our gifted funding has been decreased. So a wide variety, but I think something that is pretty exciting is that these principals and staff members have really shown their enthusiasm and their dedication to improving learning. So therefore, when we kind of take a look at this, we know that they value this. We know that it's great for the kids. Our summer institutes have been reported to be very successful. District-wide, again, we've helped fund the Summer Boost program, which you'll hear more about in a little bit. Title I math specialists, Mrs. Cerna had written a grant proposal for a math specialist in our Title I buildings. This helped fund that. iReady, as you've heard in past presentations, and tonight we are using ESSER funds to pay for that for the elementary levels. And of course, student support services and JCFS to help with social emotional learning. So tomorrow we're pretty excited. We start our new committee. We had well over 30 applicants, and we have about 25 or 26 committee members. These members are parents, they're classified staff, certified staff, and administrators. We even have our finance person on here to help us with things. So we're excited that we're going to review the district vision and mission. We're going to review our learning priorities and go over the rubric and the proposals and just get acquainted with one another and learn more about why they joined. For those that aren't on the committee but would like to express their interest and let us hear their input, I'm going to be scheduling meetings with them, either one-on-one or one in small group, whichever they prefer. I've talked to a few parents already, and we'll be preparing time for more. So again, our next steps, first meeting is tomorrow on Teams at 3:30. We're very excited about that. The agendas have been set, and parents are very excited and staff are very excited to be part of this. So lots of great ideas from our community and from our staff, and we can't wait to get started. So with that, Shannon and I will take any questions.
Thank you. Are there any board member questions or comments? Vice President Sanowski?
Yes, I do have some questions and then also some suggestions, if I may. Question would be, how has the delivery of Jewish Family Service Model changed because of this funding?
More campuses are allowed to have those services. I can speak even for last year. We were able to increase the amount of services that our school received and the frequency in which they received it.
So this would be in addition to our social workers
This
and our
is
counselors?
Yes.
So providing layers of support for our students.
Exactly, that's
Super.
where I was going, the layers. Mhm.
Great, thank you. That's helpful to understand that. Now, looking at some of these learning loss priorities, there's an obvious focus, and it's on math and ELA. My concern is, where's this, even looking at some of the proposals and the rubric, where is the creative element and the physical and mental health proposals? I would really like those to be considered. Science, the arts, those things we know are all good for development of our students. And I don't think we're here as an education service entity just to provide and focus on math and language arts. I do understand that our testing is heavily tied to that, and that is often the reason why we focus our support behind these for the learning loss. But I do think we need to consider other things as well.
Thank you for that suggestion. We have funded a little over $300,000 towards student support services for the social emotional learning and for the total wellness of the child with Mrs. Cron. She delivered a proposal, so we have that, plus some of our, the beginning salaries of the social workers were funded out of ESSER as well. So we have done that, as well as some of the proposals that included the arts or science. They may not have met the ESSER guidelines, but we were able then to work with Ms. Crozier and find funds for them. So, for instance, there was a request for extra band lessons not in the evening, but after school. So we're working to find the funds for that aren't necessarily tied to ESSER, but that we could use and then use ESSER for something else.
Okay, good. That's good to know that. I'm just hoping that the proposal rubric isn't as rigid as it appears and might leave out some of those fun and creative activities that children do really enjoy.
Right, and even when a proposal perhaps wasn't recommended or was unclear to the committee if it really fit under the ESSER umbrella, it is brought to members of the cabinet to ask them if there is possibly funding somewhere else for those programs.
Great, and I hope the teachers take advantage of that and put their great ideas forward. Thank you.
Do you have any further questions or comments? Board Member Beckman and then Board Member Hart-Wells.
So, kind of speaking to Vice President Sanowski's point, our foreign language issues, like the gaps there could be tremendous, as we're aware. They build on each other yearly. So that would be on my mind. Thank you for this. It's a beautiful presentation. So I always speak as a board member and as a parent, and I really want you to talk about how the implementation of this is going to work. I know I've been kind of beating up a little bit on our teaching and learning department this week about the tutoring, and not necessarily in the actual tutoring itself. It's been fantastic. My daughter is doing tutoring right now. But in getting the communication out to our families so they don't have any more work to do to have to seek out this information to see what's available to them. Because I can tell you right now, a lot of our students are really falling behind. We don't have time to sit here and talk through the committees, which I know we need them, and wait to develop this wonderful plan. They're behind now. And they need to hear how they can get this support today. And I thank Teaching and Learning for rolling out on our website the information about how to access varsity tutors and to speak to how to work with the tutoring, the individual teacher level. But I would say we really need to get going on this because, and I also $6.3 million addressing the learning loss. But I look at some of these things, for instance, with the tutoring, there's small amounts that are being paid out. If that is not all used, are we going to continue that? It's really a great resource that I see us needing for a long time for these students. So how long would we continue it if a child doesn't use, for instance, for varsity tutoring, they're offered 6 hours. If someone doesn't use it, are we going to let students use more? How are these going to be addressed as far as continuing for these kids that maybe don't catch up in a certain amount of time? And finally, if you can speak to that, finally, are we going to bring on more things just at the site level and offer them for the families, the reading specialists, like we talked about the language, or because from $6.3 million addressing learning loss, I see a lot of money being spent on the identifying programs that, to see where the loss may be, but I'd like to see more hit the actual student level as far as the implementation goes.
Thank you. And if I may, we need to remember this is a 3-year grant. So unlike maybe some other grants where there's a shorter time period, we know that we're projecting forward. It was very important to us that we see what the Strategic Planning Committee decided the focus should be and what our priorities are so that we could align that. So identification is the first step, and then looking to see from these committee members, especially, they're full of ideas and excitement, trying to get their input as well. So now as we have the identification, we can also then seek what are the ideas that will take us not only for these 3 years and for the kids to catch up these 3 years, but really move us on beyond that. So something that's in place that will set the stage for years to come. So this is really in its infancy.
The other part of that is with the budget, we're not set in stone on what we have right here. It's flexible. This is just what we think right now we should allocate for different things. If we spend a little bit less somewhere else as we go down this road for the next 3 years, we can reallocate those numbers. What we wanted to make sure of is to set a number aside for learning loss and know that that's flexible over the next 3 years. But nothing on here is completely set in stone that it can't be changed within the budget. We can make adjustments as we go down the road. If we say, we don't need as much for contingency or for ADM loss, but boy, we sure do need a little bit more over here for another program, we can make those adjustments as we go along. So it's anything that we see in there, we'll be moving those numbers around as we go through the program. We might not need as much for one program as we need for the other. The other part of it is we were trying to be careful about hiring staff, knowing that in 3 years, that would mean that we would possibly be reducing staff, which is always hard. So we've tried to be very strategic about what positions do we add to it so that in 3 years, we're not saying, oh my gosh, we have to get rid of 30, 40 employees because we no longer have this funding to help cover those positions. So I think the team has also tried to be very strategic on hiring where we need it, but not not overdoing it where we have to then cut staff down the road.
I appreciate that, thank you. And I recognize that it's for 3 years. I would just like to see us kind of move this along, as I think I made that clear. I feel like our kids right now are trying to learn new content with having not absorbed the previous fundamentals, and that is really difficult to do. So they need support over here at the same time while learning that content. It has to happen soon. So I do appreciate that it is for 3 years. I know that we have to be targeted in our approach, but again, kind of some sense of urgency.
Can I jump in with just a few comments about the tutoring board member Beckman? So I'm really excited
the spring. The elementary program was created actually in just a couple weeks by two coordinators you'll hear today. So that sense of urgency and what we accomplished in this summer, I think reflects that and is a point of pride. And then also creating that small committee to start approving proposals right away while we build the larger process. We didn't want to wait. When Tavon wanted to be responsive in order and start a program in the summer, then we could approve that right away. So we were trying to build it as we were approving and spending and being responsive. I can't tell you, we learn so much every day during the changes and ebbs and flows with this pandemic. So when we tried to respond to the number of students in quarantine with asking teachers to tutor or varsity tutors, we thought that the teacher would reach out and provide either tutoring hours or the varsity tutor hours. And then it turned out that the quarantine periods were really shortening, which was great, that students can come back early, but the communication wasn't happening fast enough because the student was coming back in a couple days. What you pointed out is something that's really important, that they don't just need support if they're home for the 3 days during a quarantine, or they may be a student that didn't even have to quarantine, but COVID has impacted their learning. So that's why, based on feedback such as yours and others, we're rolling out varsity tutors for families that need it. And so instead of waiting for that communication, you can walk out the door, go to the website, and access 6 hours of individualized support. Families need flexibility. They need to schedule it on their time, which can happen virtually. We also understand our teachers are tired and exhausted, and we don't have enough staff to meet all the needs. So by partnering with an outside provider, we're able to help partner and meet some of those needs. I absolutely hear the sense of urgency, and we are absolutely on it. I appreciate that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Board Member Hartwells.
Thank you. I appreciate the comment about not letting the bureaucracy be a rate-limiting step to access resources. I'm going to take this from a little bit different perspective, and I'm glad we have this slide up because this is the one I want to talk about. So from 2020 to 2021, to date, we've spent, based on this presentation, a little over $7 million in some kind of COVID relief funding for various things. And this column represents where we're at in terms of these learning loss goals. Not commenting on whether these are the right goals or not, but these are the ones you've chosen for now. And they're pretty bad, right? I mean, they're not great. And then we're going to spend several more millions of dollars this year. And what I'm getting to is, do we really think 10% increases are what we're shooting for here? That's a lot of money. And I would argue, here's how I looked at it. I spent the last 3 days giving exams. I have a little over 100 students, let's just say 100. And I asked myself, after I went through grading everything this morning, would I be okay if 15 of my 100 students pass this exam? And the answer is no. So my question is drawn to this, the goals, the percents of goals. Where did these numbers originate? Are these rooted in some research that's where we need to be this year? Granted, this is a 3-year, so there should be subsequent goals. Can you give us a little history on where these numbers came from for this school year?
So we do have Dr. Bachna in the cloud. So I'd like to ask Dr. Bachna to engage because Dr. Hartwells, you answered some really great questions. And until we get to 100% of all students proficient, we won't rest. But Dr. Bachna, if you can talk about setting realistic goals and where we were at with designing these.
Sure. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Great. So yes, we were trying to set some realistic but ambitious goals in terms of 10%, just looking at our historical data. and what might be the potential, especially looking at our data for our EL students and our Title I students. Our percent proficient over time has tended to be in the lower ranges, and so we saw 10% as a potentially ambitious goal. That being said, we are open to discussion in terms of what could be, what should, we all agree that we should be aiming towards 100%, but what is realistic in our first year?
Thank you, Dr. Barnett. The point I'm trying to make is there's millions of dollars being put into pushing these goals, these percents higher. And do we really think that $7 million, what we're going to get from that is 10%? That's where I'm getting at. This is really the dollar value for that kind of increase?
I would frame the response a little bit differently. First, the measures that you're looking at here are status indicators. We know the state assessment is changing yet again this year. So we're setting a target in an arbitrary way with a new assessment that no one's ever seen before. Secondly, it doesn't take into account the fact that many of these students are multiple grade levels behind already. So if in a classroom and with this investment, we help a student grow 1.5 years worth of growth or 2 years worth of growth, they still may be behind and not test proficient because of how far they've been behind before. It also doesn't take into account that COVID is still prevalent within our community and is disrupting individual families and students' lives in differential ways. So this was an attempt to identify a target so that we actually are showing that we expect to see learning gains and improvement. We could go to growth measures, which would probably be better in terms of being able to say, okay, what did we see in terms of our investment and the student learning specifically? But the general public looks at public schools and tries to measure us based on this status assessment at the end of each year. And so we're reflecting what people are accustomed to see, but I would argue that if we were going to really be breaking it out, there would be a lot more measures in order to look at what the growth indicators are for each student.
Thank you. How much feedback did you get from the individual buildings on whether these numbers were realistic but ambitious?
So we actually are rolling this out tonight to get some feedback. These are very common goals that you will see in many of the site plans related to improvement and growth measures. So, but this would be focused on ESSER. So what's going to happen first is Ms. Bengola will be bringing these to the ESSER committee tomorrow for additional feedback. And then once we have board member feedback and ESSER feedback, committee feedback, then we will talk to the principals about it. Their goals may be reflected a bit differently based on their current students' proficiency levels in their school improvement plans. So it's not that we're saying these are their goals. These are shared goals as a district, but they're going to have individual areas of focus while supporting our overarching goals. What we're trying to do is, based on Dr. Bachna's presentation last spring, develop focused areas of priority and make sure that we are actually measuring. And you will see some very specific growth data from our summer presentations. Each program has a database to share, which I think is really important. I do appreciate Dr. Menzel's comment on growth, because many of these assessments go beyond the state assessments, which is why we have iReady, which is why we have FastBridge, because we're trying to look at learning more specifically for each individual learner and what they need. So we have some students right now that are more than 1 year behind in mathematics, and we're really focused on getting them ready for algebra. And it may take time, but we need to get more than 1 year's growth from the students that are behind. So this is a draft, and we're open to feedback.
Okay, thank you. My feedback is I think 10% is woefully too low. I'll just end with a request. I'd like the board to consider instructing the administration to develop a monthly update to be shared with the community and posted publicly that de minimis discloses the amount budgeted for each of the proposals that the the cabinet ends up authorizing expenditures for, including the required outcomes that are being tracked, which is part of actually the federal grant requirements, the PI, or the lead person, in all corresponding sites and personnel that are being paid, the dates that the programs are expected to end and/or be reviewed. Under the federal grant, you'd be required to do these anyway, so I'm asking the board to consider directing the administration to construct that information now, because when you put goals out, you have to be able to manage to them, but if you don't put the goals out there, you can't manage to them. So I'm asking you to put them out there now. Thank you.
Do you have any further questions or comments? Do any other board members have any questions or comments? Board Member Lindsay?
Just wanted to thank you for answering my questions ahead of time. And one other question: out of the 36 proposals so far that were submitted under the original committee, how many were approved?
I do not have all that were approved, but there were approximately 25 that were approved. There were several then that were, as I mentioned before, may not be an ESSER proposal, but were then funded using different funds.
Okay.
And there were some that were proposed and those people have left the district. So obviously we didn't go through with that one.
Thank you.
Are there any other board member questions or comments? Well, first of all, thank you for this presentation and for the update. Board Member Hartwell, because this is not an action item, we can't direct the administration at this time to do that, but I think it's certainly worthwhile. I don't know if a direction is really needed on this specific point. I think it is a worthwhile thing to create an ESSER page where we identify the different programs that we're approving, and any information that has to be already submitted to the federal government can of course be made public on that page if we don't already have that. I feel like we had something similar to it before, but if not, I do think that transparency and accountability is an important part, and providing those monthly updates to the public about what's going on is not just beneficial in terms of money spent and outcomes, but I also think it shows the work that's being done by our staff to improve these outcomes. I do share Vice President Sanowski's point. I think that we have to acknowledge, as Superintendent Menzel noted, that education and how we measure success is problematic in this state as a whole, because we do mainly assess English language, arts, and math. We do have some science-based assessments, but we do not have assessments as one would expect in a high-performing education system in all of the subjects that we do, whether that's not just in terms of assessments, but also generalized standards that can be nationally benchmarked against each other. So I think it's a very good point that we need to focus on the whole student, on courses, academic courses outside of this, as well as, I guess you might say, academic adjacent courses that students enjoy taking that might bring a student who otherwise might not show up to school and might be choosing to miss school more than 10 days. How does that child get inspired to come to class? And maybe that's something as simple as a yoga class club, or something as robotics, or some other extracurricular activity or course that really gets our students in there. Originally, a number of these, I had asked that we develop some sort of key performance indicators for this system. I appreciate you doing that. A number of these, I know that the numbers are different than what had necessarily been proposed. The actual proposal came from a system of KPIs that we were going to discuss at our board retreat for the district as a whole, that we would be kind of potentially taking on to discuss. And we've broken those down, one, because the retreat had to be changed, the date changed, so we've not had it yet. And two, some of them, like some of the ones listed here, are smaller than what you might see at a board level, so they've been co-opted to an extent. I agree that the numbers are the difficult thing here, because if we tell if we tell the public we took students who were 3 grade levels behind and moved them to 1 grade level behind, that's an enormous amount of growth in 1 year. The public is just going to see that there's a student 1 year behind. I mean, that's what they're going to hit us on. And I think, you know, the answer is we want, for many of these columns, the number to be 100%. So, you know, I don't think it's, I don't know, Board Member Hartwells, if you would like to suggest some numbers here, but it's not truly a 10% increase. It's actually a 200% increase from 5% to 15%. I mean, that's how that is. I mean, you can say it's just 10%, but it's not. I mean, you're actually talking about getting someone from 5% to 15%. It's semantics maybe, but I mean, that is a lot of growth. If we're talking about 3rd grade students or 8th grade students, you know, who are testing how many students did we say were testing 3 grade levels behind?
I have to go back and look at
It was
that
like 14% or something. I mean, that is a lot of ground to cover, and COVID certainly exacerbated the issue, but it's been an ongoing issue. So I think actually finally setting a goal and constantly focusing on increasing that goal is how we're going to get from the 5% or these low numbers to the 100%. And I think if we, you know, if we we can make any number. If we can say English language learner proficiency on math state assessment from 5% to 30%. We want to have a stretch and we want to have a realistic goal. I think if we hit more than 15%, if we hit 20%, then we know that that goal was not enough of a stretch. And next year, instead of it being just another, you know, 200 or 10% bump, you know, we make it 50 or whatever. So I can't really speak to the goals. I think I'm just glad that we've set them, and that's what we're going to aim to achieve and hopefully exceed, and we'll see what happens. So I'm fine with that. Board Member Hartwells and then Board Member Beckman.
Thank you. I'd like to respond since you asked. I'm not going, I think the word is arbitrary. I don't think the number should be arbitrary. Secondly, let me tell you how I look at this, and it's not to pick apart the steps to get to the goal, which is that the student is proficient and competitive when they graduate. And so if a student, we want to celebrate a student achieving only 1 grade behind but not 3, that's not good enough because it's not fair to the student. When they're done and they're out of here, they have to be prepared. It's not okay in the workforce. I'm not going to get on a soapbox, but that's how I look at this, is I look at this from the student, are they ready? And I think that's how we have to look at it. Thank you.
Board Member Beckman.
Are we going to dive deeper into this at a different time? I believe we are, okay, because I would like to see, we have always beat the state. I mean, since the beginning of time, Scottsdale has. So for me, that's not even really, that's a nice little kind of looking at, but I'd like to see some peer district comparisons. I would like to see a lot more when we deep dive into these goals, because I agree. I want them to be accurate. I want them to be achievable, but I want us to reach, because, yeah, so I'll wait for that, but thank you.
Vice President Zanowski.
Pushing it a little bit further, instead of ready, competitive, no matter what field they choose, whether it's post-secondary or the workforce right away, we need to be celebrating and looking forward to celebrating that our students are competitive, able to be competitive in the workforce, because their worlds as workers is going to be changing much more rapidly than anyone in this room has experienced. So I would like us to really focus on really pushing this hard.
Are there any other questions or comments? I would just like to note a couple things. First, we have been provided comparisons when it comes to AZ merit scores. Is that correct? If I recall, we were given some a few months ago.
Yes.
And we did meet or exceed. We either met the top performing school district or we were the top performing district in almost every measure.
We're in the top 3 of the, when I say comparable districts, in the list of districts that were included. It had Fountain Hills, it had Cave Creek. Those aren't really comparable in terms of size. It also had Dysart, Deer Valley, Chandler, Higley, Gilbert. So we had a good cross-sector of school districts. And with the exception of a couple of grade levels, we're in the top 3. So if we're not number 1, and that's including some of the smaller districts that scored higher. So from that status assessment, looking at where we are on that performance indicator, we perform comparable to and at the higher end of other districts in the valley. As I said in the report, we're not satisfied with that performance. The challenge is this. And I'll choose, I could pick a couple of metaphors, but I'll use this one, and hopefully it doesn't offend anyone. But if I was going to have a weight loss goal of 50 pounds, I can't lose 50 pounds in a month. It just isn't possible, or if I did, it would be something wrong with me from a health perspective. The same is true if a student is 3 grade levels behind in mathematics. Unless you're just focusing only on math to the exclusion of everything else, the way to get to proficiency while still having students engaged and owning the learning takes more time. And so setting goals that understand how we build to get to that ultimate objective of proficiency for all of our students, while also recognizing that there are so many other intervening variables that we have to contend with, it's not an excuse, it's a reality. Kids get abused at home. That impacts their ability to be successful in the classroom. And so we have to attend to all of those issues. That's why social-emotional health is so important for our kids. It's why recognizing that if we set a goal that can't be met by a student or by a teacher because it's too ambitious, what is the net result of that? The net result is, well, why should I try? Because I can't meet the goal. So it's Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. You have to stretch far enough so that it's attainable, but not so far that people give up. And so that's the balancing act, not as an excuse, but to say, let's look at all of the indicators and then build our strategy so that we engage all students in world-class, future-focused learning. That's our commitment. At our retreat, we'll be able to spend a little bit more time on some of the specifics, but I think it's much more nuanced than just a percentage on a slide. It really is about understanding the complexities associated with helping all of our students where they are move to places of proficiency as they move through the system.
Thank you. And I appreciate that clarification because when you came to the district, one of the recommendations you made was to read Mark Tucker's book on leading high-performing school districts, and having outcomes and accountability is one of the important things that's in there, and I think that this plays into that. But we also have to remember that we are talking about a system in Arizona, and I know from all of you, I don't need to explain the flaws in our system. We don't have, for example, fully funded pre-kindergarten for all students. And so while we do provide pre-kindergarten for some, right off the bat, we know that at kindergarten, there are students who are already behind because of for any number of reasons, but oftentimes socioeconomic status is a big driving force, and home life is a big driving force. So if we're saying that for some, there are already gaps there at that point in time, and we are working extra hard at that kindergarten level to build up, but you're a grade level behind here, then we have COVID that interrupts your education, now you're 2 grade levels behind. Now we have to do, there's a lot that goes into the K-12 education system that is very difficult to convey to the public at large, and I know these numbers might seem low, and if we want, we can propose, we can recommend to the administration to increase them. I think it sounds like they did that. Sorry, I used the word arbitrarily in a confusing way. I did not mean that the administration is providing arbitrary numbers, but that if we want to increase them, now that might be a bit more arbitrary. I would like to see success over time, and I think if we set, really high numbers, I don't think that's how it works. I mean, when I think about Google and the major successful companies have adopted the OKR system. That's a system where a good result is getting 60 to 70% of your goal. If you're supposed to get 100 widgets sold, that's your goal, selling 60 is considered a success. So, I think, it depends how you want to measure these and play with these numbers and looking at what other organizations do. But at the same time, as much as we want to professionalize some aspects and set goals and be kind of business-like, if you will, and strict here, we do also have to contend with the fact that we are K-12 education and we do teach more than just these courses. We really do. And unfortunately, while there are certain certifications and everything, it's pretty hard to tell the public how well we've done on band class because we don't have standardized exams for those classes. So it's not fair, right? I mean, students who, let's say a student might be a year behind on math, but is incredible at an instrument or an art or something. We don't have that ability because of how our education system is set up in this state and elsewhere. So, I mean, there has to be some give and take here. And I appreciate the fact that we went and tried to put accountability that our team feels is right for this first year goal. So, I mean, that's how I feel on that. But if the board wishes to, recommend some other numbers, I think this is the time to do it rather than later, because later it'll be too late. We're at the start of September now, so I think if we don't want to come back in October and change these numbers.
We can't, we don't have the ability to take action on this tonight.
Right,
but we do have a board retreat next Monday. We have an opportunity to talk about some of the nuances here.
Right.
And I think that's a really important conversation to have. That was not the intent of the ESSER presentation this evening.
All right, are there any other board member questions or comments?
If I may give one last comment about the percentages, what I also see is by going through the proposals with those non-academic, let's say, programs such as the music or the fine arts, that may be what that child needs to feel that success, therefore indirectly translating to possibly performing better on an assessment because they feel good about themselves, that they're listened to, that they have a strength, and that they have more buy-in. The hardest thing, I think, for any teacher is to see a child's performance on a test and say, I know they're better than what that assessment showed, but they're not good test takers, or they get test fatigue, or they change the test, the format Dr. Menzel mentioned that AZ Merit is changing. That's very difficult for us to get a percentage when we're even a building principal trying to motivate the staff or have the staff set goals, because we're aiming for an unknown target. iReady, if years go down, we'll be able to see what can we predict would be the growth. Right now, they would have a target growth for national norms. We can see it for district norms in the next coming months. But right now, we have a lot of unknowns of what our past performance is because we're new at some of these assessments.
Thank you for that. And I would just say again, if the overall goal, and this is something that can be discussed on during our retreat, if the overall focus is on college or career readiness in any field, competitiveness, then really the only metric that matters to us as a board is the ACT college figure, which all students have to take, or whatever we adopt. And I think this is part of the strategic planning process. Whatever gateway we adopt, that would be our major concern as opposed to these figures, because in theory, the idea is these will always be improved, and then they will be hitting that readiness at that grade level. So I think there's a lot more that can be discussed, and we can discuss it on during our board retreat. All right, thank you very much. The board will now move to agenda item 5C, information discussion items, summer school program update.
Thank you, President Greenberg. Dr. Guerin and team are prepared to present a review of our summer programs. There are multiple, and there are a lot of people here this evening, and I think that you'll find this very informative. Dr. Guerin.
Thank you, Dr. Menzel. President Greenberg, Vice President Sanowski, governing board members, Ms. Wagner, and guests, and Dr. Menzel. This presentation is so timely after the one we just had because as you review our response and set goals, sometimes it's so important to hear about specificity, to see what our amazing employees can create so quickly in response to our student needs. And will show that what we've accomplished this summer is simply amazing. In the spring of 2021, and we began planning for the summer, we asked ourselves, what can we do differently? We have tried and true summer programming that we value as a school district, but how can we address and prioritize immediate needs? How can we use ESSER dollars to take it to a new level? And how can we measure if we accomplished what we set to accomplish? Dr. Menzel always says, how are the students and how do we know? And we haven't measured summer programming to this extent before. So we were exhausted from last year. We took a deep breath and we said, okay, let's do this. Are we going to be able to find 20-something math teachers willing to teach in the summer for focusing on high school and middle school math? Are we going to find the elementary teachers willing to come back and teach these summer programs? And I have to say, our educators did come back and do this. And so there's so much pride in the creativity. I want to highlight that we're focusing on what's different based on our current situation. So I don't want to be remiss and not mention the site programs, some of them that were different because of the pandemic and some that are just tried and true and are so valued by their communities. But what we're going to do is highlight the ones that we either expanded or created from new or made changes because of COVID. We understood that we had multiple needs, so we had to provide really a buffet of programming. So some students were learning virtually last year, and they were ready to return in person. And they needed that in-person learning, and they needed to be with their peers, and they needed socialization. So we really heard that from some parents. Some families were not ready to return to in-person learning, but they still wanted their students virtually to be connected and to help with learning loss. Others were focused on a specific need for their child. My student's behind in this subject. How can I have individual needs met? Maybe English language learning, math, ELA, social emotional support, just a variety. We didn't want to tell anyone no, but we wanted to have a focused approach. So that's why you're going to hear a variety. With ESSER dollars to support our programs, many talented staff members came together. Tonight, the leaders of each program are going to present. And so we're going to have a few more presenters than typical, but they speak with such passion about what was accomplished and the nuance of their program that we think is so important. So when we began designing program, an area of focus we wanted to talk about was to remove barriers. So if we go to the next slide, or maybe I can forward it. We talked about needing to offer in-person and virtual. So when we built our middle school math program, how could we expand it to different grade levels and have an in-person and virtual option? How could we provide transportation when we've never provided transportation before to summer programs? So if we were going to pick hubs and invite students based on academic need, how could we get them there? And so Brendan Wagner stepped up and really made it happen. And again, they were also exhausted from the school year and had a driver shortage. So that was critical to remove that barrier. Of course, Team Awesome stepped up to provide breakfast and lunch at these programs and access to food. And we also provided technology and hotspots. Sometimes a family says, we have internet, but when you try to run a program, is it high-speed internet? Is it the internet speed that we need? And do they need devices? So we first started to remove all these barriers with our resources and asked all these amazing departments to step up once again and help us pull this off in the summer. I would now like to turn it over to Melissa Fay. Melissa Fay and Holly Schreff, who are back there and are going to wave right now. We have one of them presenting, but both of them here. We asked them to create a brand new elementary program in about 3 weeks, and these ladies performed the miracle. So I'm very excited to share what they built in response to the elementary need that was shared by Dr. Bachna with her data. So I'll turn it over to Melissa.
Thank you, Dr. Guerin. So the mission of Summer Boost, if you will, was to offer a targeted reading intervention to our K-5 students, which is something that we've really never previously done before. We began by reaching out to all of our K-5 teachers and asking them to identify students that they felt could benefit from such a type of program. And this included the students who were still in distance learning, and we had quite a few students who actually participated in our program, and that was their first time being on campus, as we were an in-person program for 4 weeks this summer. After receiving all the names from teachers, we were able, for our K-3 students, to pull FastBridge data to look at their spring FastBridge results. 4th and 5th grade had just gotten board approved, so we didn't have that data in FastBridge for our 4th and 5th graders, but we used the ELA benchmarks to help us identify students that could benefit from these reading interventions. And once we identified students, and we were so grateful to have certified SUSD teachers on board to lead all of these classes, we began designing the day to make sure that there would be ample time for teachers to meet in small groups and or one-on-one with students on a daily basis. And so we developed a bank of project-based learning activities that teachers could pull from that were designed specifically for the abilities and the strengths of the students that we had with us on campus, so that students could collaborate and create solutions to different scenarios that were presented. We also provided quite a few centers and hands-on games and learning activities that students could do together while teachers were pulling small groups throughout the day. And those activities reinforced basic reading and math concepts. Through the help of our math coaches, there was also the creation of a bank of 3-act tasks and number talks that teachers use daily in the classrooms. And what we saw with that was that a lot of students who were initially very reluctant to participate in discussions and thinking through math problems became a lot more comfortable being able to do that. And they were willing to engage once they got more comfortable with that experience. So we were very happy to see that. Oops, I'm so sorry, I went the wrong way by accident. Overall, when we take the FastBridge data that was collected in the spring and we compare it to the FastBridge data that was just most recently collected, for grades K and 1, we use the nonsense word assessment to measure progress, and in 2 through 5, we use the CBM reading, which is essentially oral reading fluency. And across all grade levels, what we saw was a reduction in the percentage of students being identified as high risk or some risk, and an increase in students who were at that lower risk category. And to the point that was just spoken, of course, we would love to see that high risk be lower, but I think this data does speak to the fact that we could argue that there was some benefit to students participating in our program. Another big component of our program was making sure that we were meeting the social emotional needs of our students. They were able to participate in a daily 30-minute special, if you will, a pull-out program where they worked with prevention specialists to focus on their social emotional strength and skill sets. And using some post-surveys that were completed at the end of the program, we see an overwhelming result that was a very effective strategy for our students. To see that 89% of students self-reported and improved self-esteem as a result of that special is really solid evidence that shows us that we were doing something right. And it really reinforces what Ms. Scharf and I were able to see on a daily basis, which was students happy to be on campus, students excited about learning, and students feeling confident in learning. And that was by far the biggest achievement and success that we saw in our program. And with that, I will turn it over to Margaret Cerna.
Good evening, everybody. I want to thank you for the opportunity to be able to give you some information and facts about our Beyond Move On When Reading program that is sponsored by Title I. We have lovingly call it the Be More program because we want our children to be more. We want them to believe in themselves. We want them to have confidence. So I just want to tell you briefly, the program came about the first summer of COVID. We had been designing an in-person program. Then the pandemic hit and we knew that we had to change and we had to make fast, innovative changes. A lot of our programs that summer got canceled. And when I spoke to my assistant superintendent, Evie, I said, we're not canceling, we're going to shift because it's going to be urgent that our Title I kids not miss a beat in any type of interventions they would need. So what we did is we decided to go virtual, and we started working with our reading specialists to identify students that were behind. And we thought, what can we do? We need to meet the needs of the stakeholders. Who were the stakeholders? The children were first, the families, and the teachers. And so we decided to develop a program that could meet all these needs. And we decided to schedule Scottsdale school teachers to be tutors. And we treated them the same way we would treat our students that are going to the doctor. We make a doctor's appointment to go in and to be able to help our kids. So we bought 1,860 tutoring hours from our teachers. The teachers took these tutoring hours and they split them up amongst their students. Each student got one-on-one with the teacher 3 times a week, and then also had small group instruction. It worked out, and it was tremendous. What really was impressive was our attendance rate. The first time we did it was 94%. This summer it was 86%, and the only reason it went down was because we had some technology problems that once we solved it, everything started to change. But the flexibility is what really made it successful. We had students that were logging on for one-on-one tutoring with their teachers in California, in Florida, in Mexico, all over the United States. And then we also had teachers that were able to teach up in their cabins. They were able to teach on the beach and whatever. And it was all mutual because the teacher met with the parents. They signed a contract. And you don't miss doctor's appointments, right? They're hard to get. You don't miss your tutoring appointments. So the flexibility really made it successful. Another word that came to mind when developing the program was accountability. We progress monitor our students, and as a principal, we would get new students coming in from other schools, and it would be a big mystery to see where they were at, what kind of interventions they have. We came up with a system now where we are going to progress monitor the students from 2nd grade to 5th grade so that they're prepared to go into the middle school. And then when they're done with middle school, they are prepared for the high school. And we're doing this by consistent progress monitoring. Our reading specialists now have an additional responsibility. They are now called reading caseworkers. We want to make sure that no child falls into the cracks. And we have found many students that have fallen through the cracks, but with all these programs that our curriculum and instruction department have put together, we're digging them out of those cracks and we are teaching them what they need to learn to be successful. And I do want to emphasize that we're going to expand this program. We've only done it in the summer. We're planning on doing during fall break, during spring break, and whenever we can get our parents to agree with the teachers. We had teachers that were tutoring on Saturdays. So it was for the convenience of the stakeholders. Now, on the next slide, do I do that here? Okay, I just kind of want to break it down real quick. The number of teachers participating was 31. And this year, last year, it was, I think, like around 30. But when we did the survey with the teachers and we asked, would you be likely to participate in this program in the future? 100% said yes. We had 187 students that were identified. And this year, 148 participated. There's our attendance rate. And these are what we could come, we wanted to make sure we had the statistics and the data of how successful our kids were being. And in Fastbridge, there's a growth of 3.85. In iReady, there was a 0.28 growth in reading, and that's about anywhere between a 2 and 3 month growth for our kids. But remember, this was only 12 days of instruction. And our iReady Lexile point growth was 14.93. Now, we received a question of explain how you looked at the growth. And when we're looking at the 14.93, we looked at the students that decided not to come to the program, that needed to come to the program, and where they were. They had a 0.8 loss in learning. When they participated in Beyond Move On when reading, 14.93 increase. That's phenomenal. That's setting the goal high and meeting it. Okay, next, this is my favorite slide, and this is where this is my why of why we are doing Beyond Move On when reading. After working with your summer school teacher, do you believe you are a better reader now? Look at those numbers. 97% of 148 students said yes. And what is encouraging about this is because once they believe in themselves, they have the confidence and the tools to be successful, these are the results you get. And just to let you know, ADE is working with us to see about bringing out the program to other school districts. And some school districts are already calling on us, and we're helping them. In closing, I want to read a survey quote from one of the students. I read more nonfiction books, and Ms. Hodge showed me so many that I like them now, and I can read them better. Also, we had parent comments. This one said, one-on-one tutoring and challenging content set Maria up for success in making jumps in her reading. Ms. Anderson is a phenomenal teacher. And lastly, this gave our child the individual attention he needed to improve his reading and comprehension skills. This has improved his confidence. That's a teacher's dream, to hear that a child now enjoys reading and is a confident reader. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Dr. Lindsay Gilbert. Is she final?
Thank you, Margaret. I'm actually in the cloud. Sorry. So I had the pleasure of coordinating our Summer Bridge program, which previously focused on predominantly 9th grade students as they entered high school. Over the last several years, we were expanding that to incoming 8th grade and 9th grade students. But for the first time, with all of our needs from COVID and our social emotional health of students, we expanded to include incoming 6th, 7th, 8th, and 9th grade students who were identified as struggling mathematically. We had 9 campuses that hosted the program. We had a 12-day session in June and an 11-day session in July, during which time 360 students attended, and we had 16 teachers who graciously gave their time to teach, whether they were in person or even with our virtual option through Desert Canyon Middle School. We had 3 teachers there who were actually teaching from out of state. And the teachers met prior to the end of the school year to agree upon the essential standards they felt would be the most beneficial to help students succeed in the upcoming school year. And those were the standards that we chose to assess on our pre-test and our post-test. We also had campuses that had a waiting list for their program. We were very, very mindful in the in-person programs that we were able to do some form of mitigation strategies, and also that the teachers could really intervene with the students as closely as they possibly could. So this slide has our attendance breakdown. We have a difference between our total attendance and the number of students completing pre-tests and post-tests. So our total attendance, you can see at the top, we're pretty consistent across all 4 grade levels. Unfortunately, we did have some students that either started the program and had to end early, or started the program late, so they didn't get the full benefit of all 11 or 12 days. And then we wanted, for data purposes, to focus on the kids who began and ended the program with the assessment of standards. So we had 55% of the kids who completed both the pretest and the post-test. And you can see on our next slide that the percentage of students who showed growth from their pretest scores to their post-test scores was pretty reasonable. Again, this was targeted standards. This is not all grade level content, but we can see that our 6th and 7th graders made some really wonderful strides. Our 8th graders and 9th graders also made some nice progress, but we still have some room to grow. And this indicates actual growth, not students who stayed the same on the pretest score and the post-test score. We really looked at kids who showed a minimum of 5% growth from start of the program to the finish of the program. And one of the things we did was we asked the students at the end of the program how they felt the Summer Bridge program supported them. So many students indicated that they enjoyed it. They had a great time being back in the classroom, doing activities that were both educational and enjoyable. They liked interacting with the teachers and with their classmates, and wanted to spend more time on the program, both length of time over the summer as well as time during the day. And what they said was that it helped them to remember what they learned in the previous school year, that it helped get them ready for middle school, and that these were skills that they could use in their middle school classes, and just that it helped them get back in the flow. It really helped them to maintain that academic mindset. So I love that we were able to expand it. I hope that we can continue that moving forward. And I'm going to pass this over now to Christine Bono to talk about high school summer school.
Thanks, Dr. Gilbert. So for high school summer school, we're just giving you kind of a broad overview of our program this summer. We had just over 1,700 kids that participated in summer school. 340 were in person, and online were just under 1,400. We had 13 in-person courses and 56 online courses. And it was important to look at how kids improve their grade. From most of the kids were taking this as a replacement. So you can see there that 86% of the students improved their grade, and the breakdown is there, and 11% maintained. And then we had a great question about looking at our numbers over time, because last year was kind of that outlier because our program was 100% online. So in 2019, you can see that we had just over 1,400 kids, so about 300 less than what we had this year, 440 in person, and over 1,000 online, fairly similar to what we had this year. And then in 2020, you can see we were 100% online. We had 1,982. And then this year, again, and reiterating, 700, just over 1,700 kids. And that kind of just shows you the breakdown of our summer school enrollment. And we are super excited to make some great modifications for the upcoming summer. We've gotten some great feedback, and I really look forward to presenting our next steps for high school summer school with you before the end of the year. And I'm going to bring up Mr. Principal Matt Gromack, who's going to talk about our ELD summer school program.
Thank you. I'm Matt Gromack. I oversaw the English Language Development Summer School. This is an annual summer school. It's a 12-day ELA intervention over 3 weeks that is open to all ELL learners in SUSD K-8. We had 135 attendees this year, which is a record high attendance for Scottsdale. We use Azella and SUSD end-of-year assessments to make flexible groups for very specific targeted instruction. We use Voyager as our ELA curriculum and also use Rocket Math to reinforce math computation skills. As you can see, 56% of our students increased their oral reading fluency in the Voyager pre and post assessments. So this is a great program that goes year after year and has consistent teachers and consistent students who year after year enjoy their experience. And I'd like to bring up our next presenter, Ms. Slover.
Hello, I'm Lindsay Slover, and I will be talking to you about our tutoring programs from this summer. So students had a couple of options for tutoring. One was student-to-student tutoring, and the other was through varsity tutors. Students who went through varsity tutors, we had 27 students who scheduled tutoring, which ended up being 120 sessions for 137 hours. And of those students who completed tutoring, the average rating was 4.9 out of 5 stars. When we look at a breakdown of the sessions that were offered to students, we had 60 sessions of elementary reading, 31 of elementary math, and 17 of middle school math, with an additional assortment in a couple of other areas for a total of 120 sessions overall. And so we were pleased to see that that many students could get access to tutoring to support them in their area of need this summer. And with that, I'll turn it over to Karen Brown to discuss our Gifted Summer School.
Good evening. This summer, we looked at a group of children that we've not serviced previously. In 2019-2020, we made the decision to use local norming to increase equity and access to an underrepresented population, specifically in our title schools. We made a commitment to those families that we would scaffold, that we would provide them the types of enrichment and extension that they had not had access to previously. Then the pandemic happened, and many of the things that we had wanted to do, we were unable to do. So, in the summer of 2021, Challenge Week Imagination Invention was born. Our funding came through DSEG as well as Title I. Those budgets were how we were able to support these learners. So the program was by invitation only. We pulled in 35 students. We did have 50 who were invited, 35 who chose to participate in grades 2 through 5. These students participated in a week of exploration and enrichment guided by our gifted specialists. Students came for either an AM session or a PM session, taking 2 classes each session. We focused on critical and creative thinking skills as well as problem solving, strategies that students could then take back into their classrooms and use on a daily basis. The feedback that we got on this was more qualitative due to the nature of the program. We were looking at enrichment and extension. Problem solving was one of the big areas that we focused on, and I pulled some of the comments that the children made. So it was exciting to hear kids say things like, "It's okay not to succeed the first time you try something." That's phenomenal for these learners because for many of them, they've not had this opportunity before. We recognize that building that growth mindset is critical. So students shared that they felt they were learning strategies that they could use anywhere. Statements like, "I'm a thinker now. I understand that I learn differently and that that's okay." Those strategies were, and those comments were common things that we heard from our students. But one of the most exciting things was that this was only a week long, and yet we heard students over and over and over again ask us, "Next year, can it be longer? Can I come back next year? Can it be all day next year? Do you have enough challenges that we could do the whole summer and do this?" That was exciting to hear from children who we've not accessed before and provided them these opportunities. So it was a wonderful and exciting experience, and with that, I will pass it on to Michelle Irvin, who is our Fine Arts Coordinator.
Thank you, Karen. I'm excited to talk to you about this great first opportunity that was proposed by Margaret Cerner and Title I to create a Title I Band and Strings Camp for some of our hardest impacted students this summer. In fact, when I talked to the teachers, we had 42 students and 3 teachers. The first comment was, this was the first time a handful of these students had ever been in person since March 2020, which is pretty powerful. It was also a great time for the students to come. They had the free transportation, the meals. We also gave them instrument usage free and curriculum, which provided them just come and have a great time with no restrictions. We focused on middle school students from Ingleside and Tonalea to kind of create that bridge from elementary to middle school and then middle school onto high school, which is a big transition period, especially with what happened with COVID and all that. We varied their day with group sessions, instrumental groupings, and various other things, as you can see from some of those pictures. And I want to bring one together, the little trombone ensemble that was playing there. They played a solo for me when I came to visit, and one of the trombone players, I was asking them what schools they went to, and he goes, I went to Tonalea, and the teacher said, he has done so amazing. Like, he was having a hard time even reading the notes, learning the slide positions, and he's just grown so much. So at the Sheet Music Library a few weeks ago, the new band director at that school, I said, hey, how is this trombone player doing? He goes, fantastic. He got first chair in the chair auditions there. So just that 2 weeks in July, 4 hours of just having time to actually build their skills. They did lots of team building, lots of group activities. It was really quite a powerful experience. I know Dr. Cerna has said she wants to keep that going again, and hopefully we expand that on to visual arts, theater, dance, and that type of stuff. So it was a really great opportunity. So I would love to bring up Dr. Guerin to wrap it up.
Thank you. And what we learned this summer is that we can reimagine the schedule and a timeline and models of learning to provide greater access. We've learned that we need to start sooner to provide parent commitment and attendance to help with that. We learned that utilizing technology actually could help access. So instead of being a barrier, we provided flexibility to families with beyond Move On When reading, and the attendance increased. So sometimes you have conceptions about things, and when you really try to reimagine what it could be, you end up being surprised by the results. We've never taken such a targeted strategic approach to prioritizing areas of need that we didn't try to teach every single math standard, that we asked our math teachers what was most important and tested that and focused on that. That we had a combination of site and district-based programs. So we had tried to have an opportunity for everyone. And that's what the tutoring helped to do, that fill in. If we didn't have a program for you, we could provide additional supports in a different way. And that we had responsive creations of intervention and programs faster than we ever thought possible. That we built Summer Bridge in just a couple weeks was quite remarkable. So I want to thank all the teachers and staff that gave the time this summer and all the families that participated, and a level of summer programming that we have not had before in SUSD. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any board member questions or comments?
What's her
Okay. I couldn't really tell who put their hands up first. Vice President Sanowski, Board Member Beckman, Board Member Hartwells, and then Board Member Lindsay.
Okay. Dr. Cerna brought up that the future thinking and the summer intersessions and breaks and before and after school tutoring and weekends. That's wonderful. I'm thrilled with that. And I also like to hear that the gifted program was using local norming. So yay. Thank you. Great teamwork with this. It looked like you guys practiced this.
We were trying to not go too long, so we were practicing.
Board Member Beckman?
Thank you. So are you already discussing what worked, and what you're doing for next summer so that we're prepared? Because obviously some of
Absolutely.
these great successes need to be carried on.
Absolutely. What's really exciting is for the first time we have some common assessments. So for example, because all students had a spring and fall FastBridge data point, and we pulled students from all the different sites, we can then measure. And as Margaret said, we measured against students that we invited that didn't attend, that maybe had even lost some learning opportunities compared to what the program did. So
to really be able to look district-wide with these common assessments to determine growth is going to help us decide, well, this really worked, how can we expand it? And this had some success, what can we do to get additional support and success for that? I was amazed at the amount of middle school students that signed up for summer intervention in mathematics and were eager to be there and felt that they were helping to prepare themselves for the next grade. That was a surprise to me. So we learned so much, and the varsity tutoring and the success and the feedback from parents on how flexible and responsive that was led us to use that as support for students in quarantine or missing school because of COVID, or just had need some additional support because of the pandemic. So we're taking lessons learned and building on what's effective, and we'll continue to do that.
Wonderful, thank you. Last comment, Michelle Irvin and Margaret, well done on that fine arts band camp. I mean, what a wonderful idea. I would challenge us to maybe think forward for next summer and continue and roll that out for all of the middle schools and potentially high schools. We have the ESSER funds. A lot of those students, they just don't have the resources at home to afford private lessons for catch-up, et cetera, because they're expensive. So, that is the fine arts department is something that kind of gets, as Board Member Sanowski pointed out earlier, it's not math and English, so, that's the primary focus, but this is just as important to some of those kids. So thank you for imagining that and making it happen, and I'd like to see that continue.
Thank you. And we are so excited to ask all the sites, to think creatively, and when funding is available, what can you imagine that you've never considered before because we didn't have resources to support that? So it's an exciting opportunity to be innovative in response to our challenges.
Board Member Hartwells.
Thank you. First, I'll just say my visceral reaction to this is very, very impressive. And so thank you to all of the teachers and the staff who made this happen for our students. I'm particularly interested in learning a little more and digging into some of these. And so what I'd like to do is just submit some questions, and you can think on those and get information later instead of trying to ask those this evening. I do have one, I guess, a question, and I'm sure you're already considering. Some of these programs lend themselves to this better than others, but following those students next school year to see more longitudinal data, the impact of this summer intervention program. I think this, in my mind, almost qualifies as like a wraparound service that could be offered at all times, and I think this is the kind of money well spent. That's my reaction to what I'm seeing here. So thank you. But I do have some follow-up questions, and I will just submit those in writing and spare you the interrogation.
Thank you, Dr. Hartwells. And what we're envisioning as we're working to build our teaching and learning data dashboard is that each student would have a dashboard that would bring together all those data points to paint a picture on what's working, what's not working, and areas of growth, so we don't have students fall through the cracks. So we're excited about that.
Board Member Lindsay.
I had wrote out some comments, but at the door, I grabbed my daughter's artwork and not my comments, so I'll keep it short. Wanted to thank Dr. Guerin and Ms. Cerner for answering my questions earlier. Much appreciated. And I wanted to thank Ms. Noski, who's no longer here. She left for an admin job elsewhere, but she was a huge help for my family setting up the tutoring for our daughter. Wanted to thank all of you guys, and also especially Ms. Vallone, Mary Vallone. She was the Kiva long-term sub last year. Now she's at Mojave, and she was my daughter's tutor this summer, and she was a huge help, really helped my daughter a lot, and it's very appreciated.
Thank you, Board Member Lindsay. Well, you forgot your paper. I forgot my readers. So I was really hoping that you guys didn't ask me to read any fine print on anything, so.
Are there any other board member questions or comments? This is another great presentation, and I appreciate all the work that everyone's put into it and the innovative programs that we've come up with. And I think when we talk about electives, oftentimes in downtimes, when we talk about cutting things, we often go to arts, education, but in reality, those are the programs that are often the best to keep, not only because they're economically better, you have one teacher to a greater number of students, but because those are classes that really interest students, let them explore their creative side and let them come in. So and inspire them to come into school. So I appreciate that. My only question is, on the ELA FastBridge results, we have low risk 40th to 99th percentile, some risk 15th to 39th percentile, and high risk 15th percentile or lower. Those brackets, are those determined by ELA FastBridge? That's how they categorize it?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
So we want to see the low risk, go up and the high risk go down. And so we're watching students and seeing how they move categories. And some students did have remarkable growth, but not enough growth to jump categories. So that's when we look individually at where a student's at and what we can do. And then it even breaks it down by skills. So what skills are the most problematic for the students, so teachers can be responsive.
Okay, that's great. I just wanted to make sure that, I just wanted to understand whether those percentiles were created by us or whether that was ELA FastBridge, but it looks like it's FastBridge itself.
So I hope I explained that right, and if I didn't, Dr. Bachna, you can correct me.
You are correct, Dr. Guerin. Yes, they are defined by FastBridge.
All right, thank you very much. Are there any final questions or comments? Excellent, well, thank you.
Thank you.
The board will now move to agenda item 5D, information discussion item on the first read of proposed revisions to policy DJE, bidding and purchasing procedures, and I believe the presentation that will be given will cover items D through N.
That is
Getting the
correct.
thumbs up. Excellent.
General Counsel Lori Bird will be reviewing the policies for a first read this evening. No action will be taken. Lori, it's all yours.
Thank you. Thank you, board members. I feel a little bad kind of following that really great presentation about students. And now we get to focus on policy, some of which is exciting, some of which is the business of the district that needs to be done. Before I start on individual policies, since it's my understanding that we really haven't gone through the quantity of policies like we're doing tonight in quite a while, I'd kind of like to explain what happens with an Arizona School Boards Association service that we're a part of called Policy Bridge. And what happens with Policy Bridge is they monitor all of the statutes and all the goings-on in the legal landscape in Arizona as it pertains to education. And they then send us advisories. Those advisories either come out contemporaneously or more often after the legislative session and we know what laws are going to impact education. We then make a policy calendar based on the advisories given to us by what's called the Policy Bridge service. As part of that service, they give us proposed language to use in our policies. Some districts simply take those policies and have the board adopt them as is. Others look at the advisories and write from whole cloth their own policies. SUSD, as my understanding has been, kind of does a hybrid of that. We take the Policy Bridge advisories. We want to make sure that we're in compliance with all of the applicable laws. But we also want to make sure that our policies reflect the unique needs and practices of our district. And so when you see the little copyright symbol on the Policy Bridge document, they're allowing us to use that document and to change it. We have permission to do that based upon our membership in the ASBA Policy Bridge service. And I know that was a concern of some of you in particular. So I just wanted you to know we're not breaking any copyright laws when we take a policy and we revise it to better reflect the needs of Scottsdale. And the other thing that I want to say just generally is that some of these policies, if you go back and look, the policy advisory came out on these policies sometimes as long as 2017, 2016. That doesn't mean that we've been in non-compliance all this time. That's not true. We have been in compliance in practice, and for any number of reasons, many of which I'm not even privy to because I wasn't here, the policy just hasn't moved forward. So we have any number of policies, and as you'll find out in this next year, we are going to be bringing a large number of policies before you for first read discussion, and then second read and adoption or rejection as you see fit. And so that's kind of the overarching view of what's going to happen not only tonight and our next board meeting, but probably what's going to happen as we move through this particular school year. So without further ado, we're going to go to the first policy, which is DJE. This is an existing policy for Scottsdale. The only thing that has changed in this policy, and you'll see that by the black line, is that the policy now says that the superintendent shall be responsible. The language has been taken out that says, or superintendent's designee. So if you go through that policy, we've been doing these things. This is a 2019 policy advisory. We have been in practice, and I don't know if Shannon's still here, but she would tell me, and she did tell me, because when we do these, we also look to the content specialists on these policies to make sure that they're reflected accurately. It's not just kind of an isolated policy committee sitting in a silo. We're looking to the district specialists and content experts to inform us as to what makes sense to recommend to bring before you. So the only change in this policy from what is in existence already, and you can find it in our policy manual, is we took out or the superintendent's designee. And as I scroll down through the policy, you'll see at the bottom all the legal statutory references, and you'll see that it will no longer be adopted in September 3rd of 2019, because if you choose to accept this policy, we will put a new adoption date on it. And these are the cross-referenced policies here at the bottom. You may know that. I don't know if members of the public know that. But these are other policies that also intersect with this particular area of governing board district policy. So before we move to the next one, because there are a lot of them, I want to ask if there are any questions about this particular policy.
Are there any board member questions or comments about policy DJE? Thank you.
All right. Moving right along. We are going to go to policy EBAA. This policy has to do with the application of pesticides on our campuses and the notifications that go along with that. We have taken the ASBA policy, the policy committee, and in conjunction with the content experts, and rewritten it a bit. And you will again see what's crossed out in black line there is what we took out, and what was added was C and D. And so this is what's changed in this policy. We had an existing EBAA. This is a revision of that policy based on applicable law that made some slight changes to the wording of the policy.
Are there any board member questions or comments about policy EBAA? All right, thank you.
This is, the next policy is in the category of G, and it is not pulling up. Hold on. Let's try this again. Here it comes. It is category of G, which means it has to do with HR and professional staff. The changes that we made to the ASBA policy It allows for an expired fingerprint card to be used initially until we sign, we can verify that. The other change of note is that we actually, they're going to certify, obviously, that they have done none of these things, committed none of these, but in doing a survey of other districts, we found that no one is requiring notarization. It's burdensome to HR, it's burdensome to the employee, and so we are requiring them to attest truthfully, and obviously, if they don't attest truthfully, that would be cause for termination, but that they have not committed any of these offenses. And if you make a false statement, it's actually a Class 3 misdemeanor, so we felt that the notarization piece didn't really add anything to that. And again, this policy is already in practice. The update is just in the black line that you see about using the expired fingerprint card and the attestation.
Are there any board member questions or comments about policy GCFC? Board member Hart-Wells?
Just to clarify, so the expired fingerprint clearance is sufficient provided that the individual has submitted for either renewal?
Yes.
Within a relatively small
Right, they have to be
okay.
awaiting renewal, and they have to submit an affidavit saying that they have a completed application on file and they're not awaiting trial for anything of a nasty nature.
Are there any other board member questions or comments about policy GCFC? Okay, thank you.
We are staying in the category of G, meaning this is a policy, or this is a staff member. This affects our staff members. What I can tell you in this policy is when we go down to we don't change anything. This is an existing policy, so we're simply revising it. There was an option in the ASBA policy that they sent to us. There was an option. The option was to either have a hearing by the governing board or to utilize a hearing officer. What we are recommending is that the governing board at its annual organizational meeting vote as to how it wants to handle hearings for suspension without pay or dismissal. And then it just cleans up some language as to what happens when these things happen. The current language proposed by the Arizona School Boards Association that's in our current policy is that currently all hearings are held by policy and it's conducted before a hearing officer. This opens up the option, if the board so chooses, to vote at its annual meeting to conduct a hearing on its own. And that's only the hearing for dismissal without pay. Suspension without pay or dismissal. It's not just a regular disciplinary hearing of staff.
Board member Beckman?
So I just have a quick question on verbiage, not as it relates to the hearing part, but on the, okay, it looks like statutory requirements under E, just kind of the delineation, E1, meeting versus hearing. Can you, I don't know if they're being interchanged, a hearing and the meeting, the verbiage, or if they are just are separate. So suspension, the supervising administrator will schedule a meeting not less than 2 days. And then as we go through this policy, a scheduled meeting is mentioned again, but it seems to relate to also a hearing. Can you let me know, are they meaning a hearing as well, or is it meeting is supposed to be a separate type of?
So you've got to look at what types of discipline are being imposed and what you're proposing to do. And also, this is certificated staff has a right to a hearing. If they're going to be dismissed, they can request a written hearing. So that's E2. If it is simply a suspension, then the supervising administrator will schedule a meeting. And so that's the difference. It
Okay.
depends on the type of discipline that is being contemplated.
Okay, so can you look down then under step one notice? For instance, A, go to section 2, right there,
Okay,
where
yep,
it says,
where it says
again,
procedure just for discipline, correct?
okay, procedure for discipline, yes.
Okay.
And then number 2, a scheduled meeting time between the supervising administrator and the certified staff member. And then down below, they go into the discipline hearing. So those are separate. They're not meant to
Correct.
be.
Those are
the same.
separate.
Okay, and that, I can email you the other questions.
Okay.
Yeah,
If
thank you.
things are confusing, if you don't believe that the policy is written clearly, this is an opportunity for you to submit that feedback, because there will be a second read of the policy, and so we can make changes if you feel, if you feel that it's not clear, or it's confusing, or, for whatever reason.
Yeah, I have some nitpicky things, but I'll just email them to you. I don't want to take the board's
Right,
time.
and remember, what I'm kind of focusing on is the changes that were made.
Right.
Some of this language was already vetted and adopted, but that doesn't mean that it can't be changed. If we're revising a policy, we're revising a policy.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other board member questions or comments about GCQF? My only question is, are you saying that the language has been amended to say that the board will vote?
At its
every-
annual meeting,
At
yes.
its annual meeting?
That's what was in the notes. Again, if you would like to propose or recommend a change, I know I had to go back and look as well.
I would recommend that, assuming other board members feel the same way, that we always go to the hearing officer rather than vote on it at each annual meeting. For one thing, I'm sure at some point it'll slip, because usually the annual meeting is so focused on board structure, open meeting law review, and those items, that this seems like something that can easily slip through the cracks. And the other side is, I don't think the board would ever want to hold the hearing itself directly.
That's fine.
Is there any, I'll let other board members, I see Board Member Beckman has a point she would like to make, so Board Member Beckman.
Just about that, it says may vote at its organizational meeting. It doesn't say will
Yeah, it doesn't
vote.
say you have to. I mean, you
Right.
could just say, we're going to, again, this is why we do first reads, to make sure that everything's clear and that everything is in accordance with the way the board feels the policy should read. There was some discussion in the committee meeting about how this should read. And again, that's what I was referring to when I said I had to go back and look at the notes. There's also some crossover between this and GDFA, which has to do with, oh no, that's fingerprint requirements. But there was some crossover with some other disciplinary about when should a hearing be held. So I recollect what you did, President Greenberg, but I also have in my notes that there was a desire to vote. So we can go back and look at that again, and if the recommendation is that we simply say that in all cases for suspension or discipline, or suspension without pay or termination, that we just use a hearing officer, then I will go back and make that correction.
I would agree with President Greenberg. I think that the default should be that we use our hearing officer, if that's what you're saying, and that then we may vote if we wanted to change that, but that we are defaulting to that we use a hearing officer.
So you want to,
typically.
unless there's.
Unless the board votes to
Unless.
do otherwise.
So you want an unless
So-
provision.
So we would have to have a board member suggest at that first meeting that we wanted to vote not to use a hearing officer for the first year, but that we would, in general, just always use one.
Okay.
I don't know how we write
Yeah,
that.
yeah, I don't mind leaving the option, but as written, it actually, I'm not sure how this happened, so I apologize, I should have caught this. Section A and B together does not make much sense, because it's saying the governing board may vote at its annual meeting that the hearings will be conducted before a hearing officer. In other words, the default is that it won't be. But then B says if the governing board decides not to hold a hearing, the board shall designate a hearing officer. So if we don't vote,
We can clean
it
that
does,
up.
yeah, it does. So I would just make it unless the governing board votes at its annual organization. Otherwise, the board shall designate a hearing officer to hold the hearing, et cetera. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Are there any other comments or questions on that point? Good, okay.
And we are staying in the Gs. I did prioritize, just so you know, things that impacted staff or students, and that's why you're seeing so many of these policies have a common theme. As we kind of go through all of the policies, we kind of have waiting in the wings. We should move away from those that have been prioritized in terms of staff and students and into some of the more esoteric issues. And also, we may move into the 2020-21 policies. So these are fingerprinting requirements. We've always had fingerprinting requirements. These expand the fingerprinting requirements to non-certificated staff and personnel, bus drivers, paras, people like that, school volunteers, if they're not a parent, because it does exempt parents and guardians who are doing like reading groups or something like that. And so the underlined language that you see is the language that's been added to the statute. This was added by ASBA. We did not change this language. We are recommending that it go forth as is because it encompasses the statutory requirements, and we want to make sure that we're in compliance. There's not a lot of wiggle room here, I guess is what I'm saying, because this is really what the statute requires of us.
Are there any board member questions or comments? Board member Hartwells?
Just a clarification, so parent or guardian of a student, what about a grandparent?
Are they the
wishes-
student's guardian?
Well, a grandparent who wishes
could
to volunteer, they would be required to have a fingerprint?
I believe that under this particular policy, yes, they would, and under the law, yes, they would.
Okay, so this is a flow down of the same recitation that's in the statute?
Yes, ma'am.
Interesting.
Are there any additional board member questions or comments? Thank you.
All right, we are moving on out of the Gs and into the Is. These are kind of health and wellness type policies, but they're also student policies. This is a brand-new policy for Scottsdale. This is the language that was suggested by the Arizona School Boards Association. This requires that CPR instruction be provided. It used to be optional for students, and now it is a requirement for students to take CPR. It's a statutory requirement, so we are simply conforming our policy to comply with the statute.
Are there any questions or comments about this policy? Board member Hartwells?
Is there a implementing regulation associated with this document?
If we adopt this policy, because we don't want to get ahead of you all, but if we adopt this policy, then there could be a regulation, although the policy in and of itself is fairly comprehensive in letting our staff know. And in fact, this has been a statutory requirement since 2019, and I believe that in practice, we are in compliance already.
Are there any further questions or comments? Thank you.
One of the things I do want to note here because I know there are people who have concerns about special education students, the IEP team can exempt a student with a disability from this requirement as a graduation requirement if it is not possible. We don't want to prevent a student from graduating because they're not able to take CPR. All right. We are moving faster than I anticipated. That's not a bad thing. Policy IJJ is a policy that we do have. It's not a new policy for SUSD, but there are some changes to it. The primary change is that they have defined what textbooks mean. And it means printed instructional materials or digital content. Did I skip one? I'm sorry. I'll go back to it.
Yes, yeah, thank you.
This has to do with essentially what is a textbook, and says that the board will approve and adopt all new textbooks and supplementary books. This is not the how policy. This is the what policy. This is what you will do. The other thing that we as a committee changed in consultation with the content experts, teaching and learning, and some of the other content, is that it says it is the responsibility of the district textbook committee. Textbooks are not selected on a site-by-site basis. They're selected on a district-wide basis, so we changed the word school in the suggested ASBA policy to read district textbook committees.
Are there any questions or comments about policy IJJ? Thank you. And if we could go back to policy IHAMD before proceeding.
Sorry.
No, it's no worries.
I skipped it because there's no redlined version of it.
You were just waiting to see if we were paying attention.
That's what it was. Or if I was paying attention, for that matter, but I was, because I saw Zach's quizzical look. This is a new policy for us. This new policy is to conform us, again, to statute. This requires instruction and training in suicide prevention. There are different ways to go about getting that instruction and training. Again, this is a policy that is not brand new. It's not a 2021 policy, and we have been in practice in compliance with this policy. One of the things that you'll notice is that at the bottom of the policy, and there's no black line or red line, this policy was adopted kind of in whole cloth because it tracks statutory language. But at the bottom, this student identification cards does come out of some 2021 policy advisories that was issued in July, and that this is what needs to be on each student's identification card. Exactly how that's going to happen, some ideas have been floated, exactly how that's going to happen. Obviously, we'll work through and we will let you know, but I will assure you that we will be in compliance with all the requirements of both this policy and the law.
Thank you. Are there any board member questions or comments? Vice President Sanowski?
Will this training be administered through Moodle or in person? Or is that kind of left up to the site?
It is unlikely that this training would be. What am I looking at?
I was looking at Dr. Sakos because she's about to jump in.
Board Member Sanowski, this particular training will be a layered approach with, principals, assistant principals, social workers, counselors. We also have some student programming that we've done for several years, Signs of Suicide at the high school level. So it'll be a layered, ongoing approach.
Thank you.
And again, it's for both students and staff. I will also tell you that Access is required to develop some training modules that will be available for the Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System that will be available. It's not mandatory that those are used, but they've been directed to create them.
Are there any other questions or comments about this policy? I would just like to note that it is Suicide Awareness Month, as well as National Suicide Awareness Week was the other week, and National Suicide Awareness Day. It is, I think, fitting that we have this policy as well as the previous policy on CPR and later on the policy on reporting child abuse and child protection, all aimed at protecting our students and providing mental health, social, emotional well-being, which is a very big part of mental health, as well as physical help for students who may need it. And I think it's really frankly a proud tradition at Scottsdale Unified School District for some time now that we do take these issues seriously and have expanded our social worker force in order to support students with one at every school and do our social emotional training with our students, as we saw from the summer camp presentation we just had, as well as work we do every year. So I think it's very fitting, and I'm glad that this policy, as well as these other ones, are coming in to really highlight that. And I think the addition of helplines on student cards is always a great thing to provide. So thank you. Are there any other questions or comments on this matter? Thank you. I think we can move.
We're almost there.
JJJ, I believe, is the
Thank you.
next one.
So JJJ was a policy by statute that was updated way back in 2016. What it was updated to do was provide and allow students to have express their cultural identity during extracurricular activities. Scottsdale has been allowing that through another policy that, our non-discrimination policy, but we took the opportunity to add that, which is actually added at the end of the policy, where it says the cultural traditions of students are considered, and that at the bottom there. There are two other things to note about this policy. So since we were going to be presenting this policy for update and revision anyway, we took the opportunity to reach out to our content experts, both our some site principals as well as our athletic director. And we looked at provision A that's highlighted there on the screen to really talk about how we can best support students academically who are also athletes. Although this would also apply to any student participating in an extracurricular activity. And so what this policy does is it sets out a framework for making sure that students are being successful both in the classroom and on the extracurricular field of play, be that a sport or be it a fine art or whatever it is they're participating in. So this language is a little different than is in the existing policy. It takes out what you see here and really makes it more easier to understand, as well as a little more specificity in what's expected of the people that are overseeing the different extracurricular activities.
Are there any board member questions or comments about policy JJJ? Board member Hart-Wells?
Right, can you go back up to the paragraph that it looks like you've condensed the the bullet points from previous iteration? Can you just walk through an example of how this would work? The second sentence opens with after improving their respective grades such that they are passing on a cumulative basis. What does that mean?
So let me give you some history. I know that nobody's here. I have no lifeboat. I can't phone a friend. So what this means is, so you know that a student is struggling. They've done their 9-week check, and they have a failing grade, or they're failing more than one class, or maybe they have D's in everything, and you know that that student is capable of more than D's. And I'll be honest with you. Let's say that they have D's and C's, but that's what that student's capable of. So a lot of the discussion focused on how do you keep students engaged and motivated, allow them to access their extracurriculars, but not at the expense of their academics. And so if you find that a student is ineligible because they're failing a class or classes, or really just slacking off, they're not working to capacity is the language that's used. If they improve and they are now passing a passing GPA, for example, then they will be eligible to participate in that team or extracurricular. It's trying to find that balance between letting a student engage in what they love and what motivates them, and still be academically doing what they should be doing. And different teams and different coaches and different arts leaders may have the student, some may have the students go around to their teacher and have them sign off. Others may check the grades themselves. I know there's a variety of ways when it comes down to implementation, but the policy expects that students will be working to their capacity and passing all of their classes in order to either compete in whatever it is or excel in whatever it is that they do outside of the academic classroom.
Board Member Beckman.
Okay, I need a little clarity on that, just because what I'm taking away from that is that it's somewhat subjective, and I wouldn't want, and you can explain to where I understand that maybe it's not, but two kids on the same team where one is failing or getting a D or whatever, and because that's the best they can do, we're going to let them play football, whereas someone else, we has that and we feel like they can do better, and so they can't. I mean, explain that to where that's not what that is, please.
So what you're echoing is very much a conversation that was had. How do you don't want to penalize the student who's truly doing the best that they can, and they might have a failing grade.
Well,
And it's an and. They are not working to capacity, and. So yes, there is an element of subjectivity, but it's also trying not to penalize those students who the best that they can do might be a C average, might be a 1.92 average. I'm not going to sit here and tell you there's not some element of subjectivity. What I can tell you that's objective is that you can't be failing any classes and still participate.
Okay, I appreciate that, and this is first read, so I'll
Yep.
think through some.
Think about
further.
that, and again, I do want to let you know that, and the other thing that you need to know about this particular policy, and I think it's this one, is that we may have to, depending on how, this policy's already been adopted. However, there's a provision in this policy that says that part of the procedure for adoption of this policy we'll hold a public hearing so that we can hear from parents or stakeholders. Maybe they're not parents, maybe they're coaches, maybe they're teachers. I will tell you that right now I'm investigating that in terms of what exactly it means by adoption of this policy. And so I will let you know. Again, this is first read. This is your first opportunity to hear these policies, be exposed to them, and be aware that it's possible that we may have to hold a public hearing if these changes are considered an adoption of a new policy.
If Board Member Hartwells.
I have a question in getting to the what does appear to be subjectivity in applying this policy. Is it possible to add a floor in terms of when you said cumulative basis, you used the example GPA, so that's what I'm thinking of, that there is some kind of floor of academic performance under which that's not subjective? Because in your scenario, an all D report card, that's
Well, I think,
hard to
I mean, when it comes to athletics, you're also dealing with your Arizona Interscholastic Sports Authority. So they also have rules separate when it comes to athletic competitions. When you're dealing with band, when you're dealing with theater, again, what the discussion that's being had here is exactly the discussion that when we took this back to our site level people, as well as our administrative level people, this is exactly the kind of issues they were struggling with. And so as a first read, I welcome suggestions as to how to make this equitable and not penalize those students for whom the only reason they're coming to school is band. The only reason they are coming and engaging with school is because they have a part in the school play. Those are all extracurriculars. We always think about football, but there's a whole lot more of them. And so it's that tension between trying to keep students engaged and having high academic expectations. And if there's a better way to balance that, we're certainly open to changing or rewording or revising what this looks like.
And if I can just add briefly, there is more specificity in the code of conduct on page 57 that outlines the no pass, no play, which is a part of AIA, and then also the requirement for students under a 2.0 GPA to participate in intervention and supports, and the frequency of grade checks for that happen. So part of this is kids participating in interventions and working toward increasing it. But there is more specificity that I'm happy to send over as well, and we can consider in our additional conversations.
And that's, again, remember, this is extracurricular activities as a whole, not just athletics as well. And then the piece about the cultural expression is in there, and I don't know why when I scroll by, I keep.
Yeah,
It's
it's
right
that
there.
black line right there.
There it is.
It's above the superintendent.
That has been added by statute. We did not change that language. That is the language that.
Yeah,
that
and
has
I
been
don't have
suggested.
any issue with that. I appreciate that this is full extracurricular, and I also appreciate the value of extracurricular activities for students and the finding a balance. But in finding a balance, you don't want to overcorrect. And if there are already other kind of belts and suspenders elsewhere, then perhaps this policy shouldn't go beyond that.
So the floor is you can't have an F in a class. So if we just want the policy to state that students who have one or more Fs in the 9-week, when that 9-week check, are not eligible to participate until they no longer have a failing grade, and that the district shall make such other regulations as deemed necessary. Would that be what we're looking for?
I think the point was made by Board Member Beckman is that this might not be applied in the same way to every student. And that element of subjectivity, where I appreciate where you're coming from in terms of capacity.
And again,
But I think there's more discussion to be had here.
Right, more discussion, because what was floated was, for example, do we want to, you must have some grade point average. We aspire to be a district of excellence. Should we increase the academic expectations for all of our students to participate in extracurricular activities? And of course, there was much discussion around that, centered on some of our more marginalized students. And again, does that provide equity? Does that disincentivize some students? Are we going to get students dropping out because so I mean, it is a much larger discussion, and how much of that you want to put into this policy is certainly at your discretion.
Yeah, I'll just end on the following point, and that is that I understand and appreciate the equity considerations, but we don't want to go down a path where we're creating an inequitable situation by trying to be too equitable. So I feel like we're not there yet.
And that's what first reads are for.
Dr. Menzel, do you have any comments on this discussion?
I agree we're not there. I'm processing multiple scenarios because there's the athletic scenario, which we have some more specificity about. Then I think about FIRST robotics. How would that apply to FIRST robotics? Is that different in nature from an athletic competition? When I'm thinking about grades and opportunities to improve, is that equitable across all of our classes? What's the frequency that a student can take an F and move it up over this period of time? How long are they going to be precluded from participating? There are a lot of other moving parts and pieces, so I think Lori's outlined the considerations that kind of led to not being as precise, but I also see where there's some potential for differential treatment based on teachers, coaches, buildings, or different extracurricular activities. So I think we should spend a little bit more time, I'll call it kicking the tires on this one, to make sure that we vetted it properly.
Okay. Are there any further questions or comments? I think it would also be helpful if any board members, for the board members who do have questions or comments or recommendations, to email those in so that there's some working basis, some starting point. Okay.
And I've been taking notes as well, so.
Excellent. I think we can move on to JLDAC.
This is a brand-new policy brought about by a 2020, I believe, may have even been 2019 requirement. Although the large print is screening and testing of students, this is vision screening of children. We already do hearing screening. In practice, we have been doing vision screening since it became a requirement. This simply takes that requirement and puts it in policy. There was no individualized changes that we made. We took the policy bridge version, and we are recommending that because, again, this is statutorily required, that we simply adopt the language as written.
Board Member Hartwells.
I have no concerns with the language itself, but I have some follow-on questions about the implementation, particularly because it expressly states applicable privacy laws, and how we would be implementing that, and if there are template documents on, for example, the communication, the process that's outlined needs to happen here.
What I can tell you is the nurses have already had training on this.
Yes, that is correct. So this has actually been in practice for a few years. I can get more level of specificity as it pertains to the communication that is sent out to families. But there is information that goes out to families regarding the vision and hearing screening that is done annually, and also for our new students as part of our 45-day screener.
Thank you. I remember because I volunteered as a student.
Thank you for that.
What I'm specifically asking about is on C. It's contemplated that there's a time window for notification and then data submission ultimately to ADHS in a confidential way.
Are you looking at provision C under screening guidelines include the following?
I am.
Okay.
Which is the back of the page for me.
Sorry, I think it's the top of my page.
Okay, yes, under the screening guidelines, C, and then under other requirements, A, which is the data submission to ADHS, and then a follow-up question for other requirements, B, which is how is this opt-out for parents implemented, but if,
okay, I can speak to a little of that. First of all, item C is contemplated to be when a new student enters the district. We do what's called a 45-day screener on that student if they haven't been screened before, if we don't have records. And that screening is not just hearing and vision, it's also screeners for it's our child find mechanism in Arizona, is our 45-day screener. So that's what item C is talking about. And then again, this is a screening, and if you scroll down on the policy, if you don't pass, what you're asked to do is really go get an actual eye exam. We want to make sure that none of our students are going to struggle in school simply because they can't see. When you get to other requirements, the annual data submission, what they mean was that complies with student privacy laws, that would be FERPA, and that we are not doing anything that violates the FERPA laws. We submit the data to the department in a way that student PII, personally identifying information, it's not in that format. And then, of course, Arizona Department of Health Services also requires with their own HIPAA laws, and so if a student or if a parent objects, we still really need to know, because the Department of Health Services says we need to know, whether that child can see or not. But that parent does have the option of taking their student to the eye doctor and then providing documentation that that student either can see just fine or they have a diagnosis of vision loss, which might trigger some other inquiries on the part of the school as it pertains to some IDEA or 504 obligations.
Thank you. And maybe this is for a follow-up, but because there has been some data acquisition in the past without the policy, what % of students are we finding that are screened to need vision care beyond for diagnostic purposes?
We can, if we have that data, I'm happy to provide it, but it's not required by the policy. I'm sure that we can access it in some way. Dr. Baca?
She's asleep, yeah.
That wouldn't necessarily pertain to this policy, but it's certainly information that we can get you.
I asked, and I'll follow up, but I learned from a few other districts that there are mobile services out there if there is a high consumption rate. I might be able to
Yeah, I don't know
look
anything
into.
about those.
Okay. Thank you.
Are there any other board member questions or comments about policy JLDAC? Okay, I believe we can move on to policy JLF.
And it is policy JLF. If you look on your agenda, there is a typo. It is not JFK as noted in the agenda item. That's simply a typo. It's, it's a lot of policies.
I will say you might be referring to the backup documents, but the agenda item does say JLF.
Right, but on the actual
Further,
description.
okay.
Correct. And I just wanted you to know, we're not talking about two different policies. It was a typo when you look at the description of the agenda item. This agenda item, again, has not been changed by us because all school districts are required to do the exact same thing. When it comes to mandatory reporting, there is nothing that we are going to go in and change. And so what you see here is we had an existing mandatory reporter policy. This is additional statutory requirements that were put in. Some of them are very obvious. It's no longer Child Protective Services. It's the Department of Child Safety. There are some things such as if it's not an emergency, DCS now prefers that those reports are made through their online system. It used to be that you would either fill out the form and mail it in or call it in. They now, as most of us do, prefer the online system. So that's noted in there. And the other thing that is somewhat of a difference, and it also differs in, this may require also a regulatory change, is that if you have information that a teacher, for example, or another mandated reporter has reported, and you are the supervisor, you are not required to double report. But, and actually I misspoke because we did make a change. I believe that the statutory language said reasonable belief. I think we changed our policy to require a little bit more than reasonable belief so that no kids would get missed. That you have to have as a supervisor actual information that someone else has reported before your obligation to report is alleviated. There's no need to double report, but someone must have reported. And if a teacher or someone else that's not an administrator or a supervisor does report, there is a requirement that that gets reported to the principal and the appropriate people. And if it's a crime, we report to law enforcement as well. And I believe we, again, these are things that are in practice already, but we're just conforming practice statute to policy.
Board Member Hartwells.
Just one follow-up. Since I believe the answer is yes. So the information that's required to be posted at the end of the policy there.
Yep.
That's all ready to go, because once this is the second read, then it's on the books.
It's my understanding that we are already in compliance with this
Okay,
policy.
thank you.
Dr. Menzel? It's at the end where we have to post a sign that talks about how to report and reporting.
I believe so, but we'll confirm.
Are there any other board member questions or comments? Well, thank you. That concludes our information discussion items for the night, and thank you, Lori, for taking the time to walk us through each of those policies and the key revisions. The board will now move to agenda item 6, consent agenda as amended. The chair moves to approve the consent agenda as amended. The amendment being that item 6D has been pulled for further discussion. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice President Sanowski seconds. It is moved and seconded that the board approve agenda item 6, consent agenda as amended. All those in favor say aye.
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 Aye. The motion carries 5-0. We will now move to agenda item 6D, approval of renewal and purchase of Florida Virtual Learning of eDynamic Learning for Scottsdale Online Learning. Board Member Beckman.
Yeah, thank you. I had wanted and asked Dr. Guerin if she could possibly discuss this for a few minutes, just to explain to us, which we have a little more information, but to the community, why this wasn't initially approved with Scottsdale Online, the Florida Virtual curriculum that we have, what it exactly is, so that people are aware that it's nothing new, and I'll let you go into the detail. Because it was on consent, I just didn't want it to appear that we were not discussing it publicly, because it is in addition to that online curriculum.
Thank you, Board Member Beckman. I'm happy to do that. So Scottsdale Online Learning has been using Florida virtual courses for 10 years now. And one of the most popular portions of Scottsdale Online is the plethora of electives that students can choose. And these are provided through Florida Virtual in partnership with a company called eDynamic Learning. So unintentionally, eDynamic Learning was left off the Florida Virtual package, and it was just assumed that it was a part of the cost. So once we continued to work with Florida Virtual on the licenses, we realized that we in fact had not paid for this additional expense. We have an enterprise license which gives us full access to all their electives, so students can make choices, and it's okay if one student takes one elective and 5 take another. So it is one of our popular things, and we pay one price for those. So it was unintentional that it was not covered. We thought it was, so that's why we're seeking approval to pay for the eDynamic Learning, by the way, that has EDL as the acronym, just to confuse things a little bit more.
So next go around, it will be attached to the Florida Virtual approval, the initial one?
Yes, this is absolutely nothing new. We've been using both of these programs for 10 years now.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Are there any further questions or comments about this agenda item? Dr. Guerin, just to confirm, will we be reviewing for next year? Or are we reviewing Florida Virtual and as to whether we want to explore other options?
We've had discussions on how to optimize, and especially because we've expanded to K-12. And we have so many more students interested in that opportunity. So we definitely are in initial discussions about that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any further questions or comments about this agenda item? The chair moves to approve consent agenda item 6D, approval of renewal and purchase of Florida Virtual licensing of eDynamic Learning for Scottsdale Online Learning. Is there a second?
Second.
Board Member Beckman seconds. It is moved and seconded that we approve consent agenda item 6D as presented. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0. The board will now move to agenda item 7A, action item, board meeting decorum. Vice President Sanowski.
Yes. Recognizing that I actually speak now as an individual. Yet collectively, I do believe that this governing board supports the decisions of the group, whether it's in favor of our own individual point of view or not. So from this point forward, I'll be using the term "we," not to minimize or be presumptuous, but to honor our collective actions and our outcomes. We acknowledge the confusion some of our public has regarding our legally mandated methods of conducting school district governance. We recognize there are parents with legitimate concerns. We want to hear those and the ideas to improve the collective student experience. We accept we have much necessary work ahead of us to make important decisions, and much of it is long overdue. And to date, we have been very thoughtful and focused on ensuring that our students can continue to work in a safe environment for in-person learning experiences. This work has not been partisan or easy. Yet the result of our decisions continues to ensue partisan threats as recall, the harassment of board members, staff, and children on our campuses, and individuals with a different point of view are made to feel diminished and even threatened. This has endangered our well-being and our progress as both as a school district and as a community. I do not believe we can continue down this path. As a community, are we encouraging self-reflection, character development, the skill of conversation, collaboration, the caring of others, or are we setting a precedent that when things don't go exactly as we want them, we get angry, we place blame, and create division? Personally, I will not be abused in this role, any role. Whether folks see eye to eye with me doesn't drive the way I relate to them or the way I treat them. We don't have to all agree, but we can be respectful. I will not accept a list of demands that are not intended to support the education advancement for all of our students. I'd like to believe we are willing to solve tough problems together rather than let hatred and fear interfere with our progress. Anywhere you go in this world today, whether it's a grocery store, to the airport, sporting events, museums, a place of worship, or even just to a friend's house, there is an expected protocol and decorum to follow. Even our students learn this and recognize this expectation as they go from classroom to classroom on our campuses. The city of Scottsdale does have a meeting decorum expectation in place, which I'd like for us to consider replicating and adopting a similar format so that we can continue with our work, and so all Scottsdale Unified stakeholders know they will be respected as they share their concerns and their ideas for improvement. With that, I'd like to open up this discussion for proposals from my governing board colleagues.
Thank you. Do all board members have a copy of the meeting decorum statement taken from the city of Scottsdale? Okay, good. Are there any comments or questions on this? I would, so if we make a motion, an action item here, a couple things. One, we would have to amend it, correct? So in a city council meeting would be in a district meeting?
And might I suggest and make this comment that we host our governing board meetings in public, but they are not public governing board meetings.
Can you elaborate, explain?
Yes, I would love to do that. Whereas the city meeting decorum talks about attending and participating in. As I understand this, and council, please correct me if I'm wrong, that when we conduct our school district governance business, it is with input, but it's not everyone gets a vote. Okay. And so the city. All the board members do. Yeah, the board members do, but not anyone in attendance. So it's not the loudest voice wins. Okay. So I think the term participating in is something, we have public comment, but we're not, by law, again, we have laws that say we cannot have conversation with someone during public comment. We can correct them. We can, if they're making personal accusations, we can correct those as well. So I want us to make sure that we are creating a meeting decorum that fits what we do here.
So if the meeting decorum statement said citizens attending and/or participating in a district meeting, either in person, virtually, or telephonically, are required to observe the same rules of order and decorum applicable to members of the district. Unauthorized remarks or demonstrations from members of the audience, would that be read appropriately in your mind?
I would add Scottsdale Unified School District instead of just the district.
Okay.
I have a question.
Governing
So
board
if we're aligning it, why wouldn't it, first of all, I would love for people to see this, but citizens attending and participating in a governing board meeting, then going, are applicable to members of the governing board and staff, or, I mean, they're referring to their council, which is aligned with our governing board. So
Yeah, I agree
why-
with that.
Yeah,
Well,
why
I
would we
guess
say district?
Well, I guess.
Well, I was talking about at the very beginning, when he talked
We-
about participating in district meeting.
Well, and yeah, well, my only comment on there, and again, I don't know how it works, but, you know, like us, the city council actually has subcommittees. You know, there are committees that you get appointed onto, you know, and we have committees that you get appointed onto. And I would think that if we really wanted to, and again, we might not, but if we really want to establish a system of decorum, we would say district meetings to include those committee meetings as well. I mean, if we have the bond oversight committee or we have a curriculum committee, do we want people to, do we want to set the expectation that you're not going to be yelling at other members in your bond oversight committee, as an example?
We're on the first sentence, correct?
Right, so.
I see your point of view, I
Right, so,
appreciate that, yes.
My only comment is, you know, in fact, if anything, at our board meetings, it's probably even harder to, because, I mean, the second sentence I have questions about, but if the point is that we want to calm tensions and kind of move back to civility, then it shouldn't just be when we're present. It should be applicable to every citizen who participates in meetings and tries to volunteer on board should know that the expectation is they will not be abused and they will not abuse others, if that makes sense. So
Yes,
that's why
it
I
does.
chose district. I mean, I do agree that, yes, for parallelism, it would be specifically the governing board, but I do think the gist was that we wanted to do this more
No,
generally.
and I do appreciate that, because I had not thought about the bigger picture of our district subcommittee meetings that are in place too, where the public is also involved there.
Does that answer that question, Board Member Beckman?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you could also create it to where it's governing board or district meeting, to where you have it all, you know, encompassing both. I'm just, because my impression was that we were aligning as much as possible. And if you were trying to capture something else too, that's one thing. I just didn't want to exchange the meaning necessarily.
Yeah, I guess that's a point open for the board. The second sentence, unauthorized remarks or demonstrations. what is, I don't know what the city of Scottsdale does. What is considered an unauthorized remark or demonstration if, for example, somebody is giving public comment and the public applauds that? Is that unauthorized or would that be authorized?
I would assume that student and staff celebrations would be authorized and appropriate.
And applause, well, I'll say this, I think, so there are two things. So personal remarks would mean all personal remarks if I were to be required to enforce this. So it can't be, if somebody wants to come up and say, Vice President Sanowski is the greatest person in the world, which we all know is true, but.
Cut the mic.
But that we would not be able to allow that, but then disallow somebody saying Vice President Sanowski is the worst person in the world. We would have to allow both. So if we're going to remove personal remarks, I think that is correctly written, that it would be personal remarks of any kind would be, would have to be enforced. Which I'm fine with. I would probably remove applause though, is the only thing not, because people clap for all sorts of things, and if somebody wants to make a public comment, whether that's supportive or not supportive of the district or of a student or a member of staff or whatever it is, I mean, I think applause is just kind of a hard thing to stop. So I would maybe remove the word applause and say, we don't really, I think if we left it as personal remarks, yells, outbursts, and or other disruptions are not permitted, that would be sufficient. Would that be amenable to you, Vice President Sanowski?
I would like the input of the board here on this. Is this throughout the entire meeting or specifically during public comment?
Well, I believe it's written as the entire meeting, but I'll let everyone else evaluate. Are there any other board member perspectives, comments, questions? None? Okay. Well, so Vice President Sanowski, I think as written, the proposal would be the statement, citizens attending and or participating in a Scottsdale Unified School District meeting, either in person, virtually, or telephonically, are required to observe the same rules of order and decorum applicable to members of Scottsdale Unified School District. Unauthorized remarks or demonstrations from members of the audience, such as personal remarks, yells, outbursts, and or other disruptions are not permitted. Would that be a fair reading of the proposal?
It would.
Okay, are there any questions or comments about that meeting decorum statement? Well, as this is your item, would you like to make a motion, or would the board prefer to table this for another? I don't know if this is just so new, or if there's just really no comments or additions to this point.
Comments, concerns,
Questions?
questions?
Dr. Menzel, any questions, comments, concerns?
The question I have relates to our policy BEDH, which references personal attacks upon board members, staff personnel, or other persons in attendance or absence by individuals who address the board are discouraged. So in the language that's currently in our policy, we've got a discouraged statement. This appears to say some of those same things are not permitted. And so there is a difference in terms of that language.
I don't think that that's necessarily a problem insofar as we're actually taking an additional step. I think the reason why the discourage came about is originally the policy said are not allowed, and I challenged that language and said that that wasn't constitutionally permissible once I joined the board, and that you can't have somebody be allowed to say, you know, board member X is amazing, but then stop the next person from saying board member X is terrible. So I think this goes above and beyond that, saying personal remarks in general are not allowed. You could, in theory, address the board and the administration, but you could not say Dr. Menzel is a terrible human being. or is a wonderful human being, if that makes sense. It could be difficult to enforce on the fly, is the only issue with the personal remarks. On the other hand, reflecting on the previous board meeting, the personal remarks were acutely targeted at certain individuals, and I respect the fact that that isn't necessarily conducive or helpful to the discussions generally, if that makes sense. Like, I appreciate that that was a pretty difficult board meeting, and there are mental health concerns and social emotional well-being of our employees, staff, other members present, and board. So if the idea is we're depersonalizing the situation, people are allowed to come and they can, good evening, governing board, I think that this policy is wrong, or I think this policy is great, or X or Y. That, I think, is pretty clearly enforceable. But if that's what we're trying to do, if we're trying to depersonalize the situation, which isn't, I don't see a problem with that.
Dr. Menzel, would that require us to make a policy adjustment then?
That
According
would
to
be
BEDH?
a question more for Lori. I just was pointing out the difference in language, which leads to my next wonder, and that is it as much about that, or is it about when I look at the last part of the provision, it mentions yells, outbursts, and other disruptions that are not permitted. If I think about the structure of our meetings and the decorum in the meeting, as you mentioned correctly so, that these are meetings held in public. They're not public meetings in the same sense that it's interaction with the audience. In order for the governing board to be able to have its conversation, to get through the agenda in a timely and efficient manner, we need to have the opportunity to be able to hear one another, to not be disrupted by outbursts from the public that's present in the room.
Right.
That seems to me to be different. So then to President Greenberg's point, I can envision that we might have a grateful parent come up to talk about one of our teachers who's just done an amazing job with their kid. And if we're saying personal comments aren't allowed,
right,
that doesn't seem to be the intent here from what I've heard. So I want to be careful that we don't unintentionally step into something that is not part of what is contemplated in terms of what we're addressing. That last sentence is the one that, with the yells, outbursts, and other disruptions, that's what would make it difficult to have a meeting. We had one on May 18th where it wasn't possible because of the yells, outbursts, and disruptions. And so that, I think, is the kind of decorum where civil discourse is what we're looking for in the conducting of school district business.
If I may, I think there are kind of, on the one hand, we could redraft this so that it does focus on the yells, outbursts, or other disruptions, because if we reflect on the meeting that had to be canceled, the issue there was very specifically that we had a demonstration going on essentially within the boardroom, and people were not following the requests that we were making. So in that case, yells, outbursts, and or other disruptions are not permitted probably captures the general meeting decorum issues. And I think perhaps the committees themselves, whether it's a board meeting or other meetings within the district, can adopt their own rules of engagement, if you will, their own expectations in addition to these. If the Bond and Oversight Committee or Audit Committee or any of the millions of curriculum, what have you, wants to create an expectation sheet that says, while we're working together, we're going to not personally attack one another, over differences of opinion. I think that works really well. And then this opens up the door to, if we want to revisit policy BEDH, to discuss potential amendments. We'll have to have 2 reads, but if we want to discuss specifically focusing on personal attacks or remarks, we can discuss that. There are other things that we can discuss. If we're concerned about length of meetings, we can have topic restrictions. We can have other types of constitutionally permissible restrictions, like we see with a public hearing, for example, where, an example that I've seen commonly used is that you're only allowed to address topics that are within the city council's or board's power. You could not come up and explain why we should not invade country X. That's not within the board's power, as an example. So maybe, Vice President Sanowski, if we wanted and you want to make a motion, we would have the reading, we would leave out the personal remarks and applause part, and then we can open up that discussion, if the board would like, to having a discussion on policy BEDH again, and revising that. Board Member Lindsay?
Wasn't there always a statement that was read in previous boards where they would talk about, like, before public comment, personal insults or attacks? And then at some point, that stopped.
Yes, so because I reviewed this specific point, there were intermittent times when those were read. They became read all the time in late 2017 and 2018. And then they stopped once, I think in mid-2018. And then we changed the language to be what we considered more constitutionally permissible, which was simply discourage, as opposed to you're not allowed to do this. Not that the rule was ever enforced, but that it was kind of done as a way to preempt things. We could read a statement. I mean, this would be that statement, essentially. Probably, this would become that
But my point would be, this is nothing really new. I mean,
Right.
There had been similar type statements read by the governing board for years.
Right. I've never taken that approach personally. I know other board presidents have, and we can, if that's the request of me. I'm happy to read out the specific language from the policy. I actually thought this was broader than that this was about the meeting as a whole as opposed to specifically public comments, which is why I noted that we can open up that discussion at the next meeting if we want to have that. And if there are any recommendations for policy changes to BEDH, those can be emailed in, and we can bring that up for a first read at another board meeting for sure.
Can I read our work?
Yes.
Okay. Citizens attending and/or participating in a Scottsdale Unified School District meeting, either in person, virtually, or telephonically, are required to observe the same rules of order and decorum applicable to members of the governing board and staff. Unauthorized remarks or demonstrations from members of the audience, yells, outbursts, and/or other disruptions are not permitted.
I think that is permissible, and I think that falls into time, manner, or place restrictions for a meeting that would be allowed. Would you like to make a motion on that? And are there any comments or questions about that? Board Member Hartwells.
I have a logistical question. So is this a policy adoption, or what is the rubric?
I think
which we're voting here?
Vice President Sanowski can speak to this. This isn't a policy adoption. I think this is just it can't be a policy adoption. This is just in a sense, in part, what Board Member Lindsay was just pointing out, that this is our general rules of decorum for meetings themselves, not a policy, but essentially the time, manner, and place restrictions that we are permitted to impose on board meetings of any kind. As opposed to, in a sense, our policy does allow me, I guess, to do some of these things unilaterally, but I think the idea is that the board should really have input and provide clear guidelines as to what the expectations are. Would that be a fair comment, Vice President Sanowski?
Yes, would.
So
Okay.
in terms of what happens if someone violates the meeting, what does that mean?
They would be removed. I would order them removed, or whoever the board president is would instruct that they be removed. I would like to give somebody a warning at least, but if they continue to disrupt the meeting, then our rules would say that they're out of order and they should be removed at that time.
I'd like to comment on something that Board Member Lindsay said. If we go back to having this, well, not back to, because this would be new verbiage, but if we read this before each meeting, that's their warning. Because we have business to do, and when we get sidetracked because of outbursts, I mean, the intent is not to take away people's rights. The intent is to allow us to continue with the work that we need to do. And so to read it at the beginning of the meeting makes sense. That's the warning. That's the notice. So you don't have to give 30 different warnings to people who.
That's fair. I'm happy to do that.
Any other comments about what is in place with this expectation?
Board Member Lindsay?
I mean, I was just simply pointing out that some type of statement had been read at board meetings since 2017. So this isn't, other boards have read statements. This
Right,
is something-
correct. Right, this is by no means novel by any means. City council uses it. It's just, I think, one of the issues that, or I would consider it not an issue, but a challenge that has arisen is that in theory, there is a lot of authority in conducting the board meetings, specifically designated on me. Now, I generally would only make decisions in consultation with the superintendent, our security officers, if they instruct me, hey, as occurred, I was instructed that the meeting simply could not take place in a calm and collective manner, and was instructed or recommended that the best course of action would be to end the meeting at that time. That wasn't a decision that I just came up with out of thin air, or recommendation I came up with out of thin air. That was what was advised, that I was advised on. So I think the idea is that this gives a more clear-cut direction from the board as a whole, that input from the board as to what we expect to occur at meetings. If there is a demonstration, is it your expectation that I just terminate the meeting, or any board president just terminate the meeting and move on? Or is the expectation that we have a clear meeting decorum rule, and we're going to enforce that specific rule?
Yes.
Board Member Beckman.
So I appreciate the intent, but since we literally just got this statement right before the meeting, I personally would like to have an opportunity to reach out to Scottsdale or whatnot and see if, I personally would like a little time to find out if they've had any issues with this verbiage, if they've heard from their public, how it's gone, if there's been any pushback. Again, understanding the intent, understanding that when I sat in your seat, I did read a statement that was given to me from the previous board about comments, with regard to personal attacks. They, before public comment. So I understand where we're coming from, but I'm someone that likes to sit with things and do the research and reach out, so.
That's fine with Board Vice President Sanowski.
May I ask, what is it that would make you?
Well, it's just the enforcement, how we're going to handle that, how they've handled it, unauthorized remarks, what are authorized, what's a demonstration. There's a lot to kind of unpack here.
Well, and the purpose is to use something that was already a rough framework and adopt it because we're within the same city. So I don't feel like what their responses have been will make a difference to us, because the purpose of this is for us to be able to conduct our meetings. It might make sense to ask them, well, what do you do, when? But that shouldn't stop us from putting in place a meeting decorum expectation.
And I understand that. It may be each individual board member's comfort level, for sure. This is just how I feel on this. Again, just receiving this particular statement this evening, I need to resonate on it, and I need to get some information. It's not me not trying to lead all of you in some way or another, but this is just how I personally feel about this.
Thank you. Are there any other board member questions or comments? Well, Board Member Hart, no? Okay. Board Member Hartwells?
Yeah, I wanted just to thank Vice President Sanowski for looking to a precedent, an existing precedent that the city works with instead of starting from scratch. It certainly makes it a lot more efficient, which I'm a fan of. So thank you for your work.
Are there any other questions or comments? Dr. Menzel.
I would just point out that in the City of Scottsdale Council Rules of Procedure, page 7 of 14, 10.2 references the principles of civil dialogue as adopted by the council in resolution number 9445. Attachment A shall serve as a guide for the conduct of city council meetings. The problem is I can't find attachment A. So it sounds really interesting, but I haven't been able to find, what's the other supporting documentation? That's the one part of, fleshing out how this actually impacts the flow of meetings in Scottsdale. It is pretty clear in section 10, debate and decorum during council meetings. They set out the expectations for council first, and at the very end of that section, have this decorum statement for the public as well. So it's not we're going to behave one way and everybody else has to behave another way.
Right.
We're holding ourselves to this high standard in order to be able to conduct the public's business. We expect everyone to do the same. So I was just trying to find that other piece, and I haven't been able to find it yet.
And I had checked with one of the council members, and I was told they have a big fat notebook of decorum and policies relating to that. So this was something that I had seen on their website, and I thought it was something that was very valuable to bring into this place of business as well.
Well, Vice President Sanowski, I'll give you the floor to make a motion to approve this. And if the vote is negative on the base, if the no votes are a result of wanting more time, because I've been advised against doing 2 votes in a single action item, so I will stick to that advice for now. So we don't want to do a table and a motion to approve. If it fails, and the stated reason is that people would like more time, then we can bring this back at our next meeting, if that's okay. So I'll give you the floor to make your motion.
Yes, I would like to make the motion that we adopt a meeting decorum statement as we have discussed.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
Board Member Hartwell seconds. It is moved and seconded to approve action item 7A, the board meeting decorum statement as amended by the board.
Could you read it?
Yes, Vice President Sanowski, would you please read the statement?
Yes. Citizens attending and/or participating in a Scottsdale Unified School District meeting, either in person, virtually, or telephonically, are required to observe the same rules of order and decorum applicable to the governing board and staff. Unauthorized remarks or demonstrations from members of the audience, yells, outbursts, and/or disruptions are not permitted.
Is there any further debate on this item? All those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say no or nay.
I am abstaining.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
And any abstentions?
Abstaining pending, it's again, not that I'm against this. I thank you for the intent, because I think it is needed, absolutely. I just don't like to take action on something that I just see. I'd like to get some feedback, so that's why I'm abstaining.
No worries. The motion carries 4-1 with one abstention being Board Member Beckman. The board will now move to agenda item 8A, adjournment of the special meeting. The chair adjourns the special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified No. 48 Governing Board on September 14th, 2021 at 9:43 p.m. Is there a second?
Second.
Vice President Sanowski seconds. It is moved and seconded that we adjourn this special meeting of the Scottsdale Unified No. 48 Governing Board at 9:43 p.m. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. The motion carries 5-0 and the meeting is adjourned.